Lord of Mystery, The Undead Don't Die from Passing Fire by author Ni Di Xun Zong. Chapter 191-200. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And those who want to support me, I have a Patreon channel, get early access to video on Patreon. Chapter 191. Life and Death, Reincarnation Never Stops. Clang. Two silver knights charged into the bloody door, one after another, shields raised, but this time there was no black knight hiding at the entrance for a sudden attack. Aside from the chilling, eerie bloody door that hinted at strangeness, everything else in the room was normal, without any danger. The light of the sunworm illuminated the entire room, bringing everything within into Ember's sight. There were 3 chairs in the room, 3 high-backed chairs of distinctly different colors, placed in 3 different directions. One was deep black, another had patterns showing dark red, as if iron and blood were intertwined, and the last high-backed chair was predominantly deep red with pure black patterns. Their styles were very similar, but their colors were completely different, and they were positioned at specific angles and distances. Clearly, they had been deliberately placed there. This was similar to the unsettling aesthetics popular in the 4th epic, but Ember felt there might be a deeper meaning hidden within. For example, for a specific ritual. Deification ritual. Ember murmured softly, the conjecture in his mind gradually taking shape. 3 chairs, 3 people, 3 sets of sequence 1 extraordinary characteristics, it all matched up perfectly. The only question was, who were the people sitting on these 3 chairs? According to the Spectre, breaking the seal required finding the direct descendants of Sauron, Einhorn, and the Medici family, obtaining 10 milliliters of blood from each, mixing it with holy water, and sprinkling it into the room. Ember's peripheral vision glanced at the ground, and not far away, he saw a patch of dried dark red stain. The stained area wasn't large, and although dried, it had a distinct dark red color, a solidified mass of blood. The stain marks were fresh, likely from the past few days. Ember's gaze swept around, and a clearer understanding formed in his mind. The blood was brought by the Black Knight, he helped the Spectre break the seal. But the Spectre left, while the Black Knight chose to stay. There were no signs of a fight at the scene, indicating their process was quite harmonious. The 2 parties should have known each other, or rather, the Spectre and the person who instructed the Black Knight to break the seal knew each other. The Black Knight let the Spectre go, and they might have even had a friendly exchange. The 3 chairs, the people on them should belong to the ancestors of the Sauron, Einhorn, and Medici families respectively, or even the sequence 1 of these 3 families. Otherwise, there would be no need to specifically require the blood of these 3 families. Using the blood of descendants to break a seal is not an uncommon example. For example, the Abraham family is plagued by a curse due to their bloodline, and the truth of this curse comes from the madness of their ancestors. But why would a Spectre need the blood of 3 families? Are there more than one Spectre? And why did the Black Knight stay here? What was he waiting for? The blasphemy card dropped by the Black Knight was originally in the Spectre's hands, but now it appeared on the Black Knight. This was undoubtedly left to him by the Spectre. The corpses in the room were left by extraordinary, and they would all retain extraordinary characteristics after death. But now these extraordinary characteristics have all been taken, yet only the most valuable blasphemy card was left behind, which was clearly intentional. Only someone with the strength to kill the Black Knight is qualified to obtain that blasphemy card. Otherwise, the Black Knight would stay here in place of the Spectre, killing all explorers who enter the ruins. His thoughts gradually diverged, but Ember ultimately couldn't find more valuable things here, and the exact number of Spectres was meaningless to Ember, he didn't care. But the appearance of the Black Knight made Ember vaguely grasp the thread of events. The Black Knight stayed here to wait for him, this was a signal. After a long while, Ember slowly withdrew his thoughts, and the ring in his hand bloomed with a light blue and illusory light. The next moment, wrapped in the light, his figure quietly disappeared. And this ancient ruin, located 1,000 years underground, once again returned to silence. At 7:15, Klein and Danitz, who came out of the first-class dining room, found that the strong wind that had been making the ship sway had calmed down considerably. After thinking for 2 seconds, Klein walked all the way to the cabin entrance and asked the crew member guarding there. Who else hasn't returned? The crew member had seen this passenger enjoy delicious merman meat with the captain, and didn't hide anything. Except for the Blanche family and the Demoto family who went to the Green Lemon restaurant, all other passengers returned before the wind picked up. Haha, that place is quite far, and the dining time is also longer. Oh right, the captain and the first mate went to the telegraph office and haven't returned yet either. The Green Lemon restaurant is a very famous restaurant on Bansi Island, and its lard is especially delicious. And Captain Aylant was going to the telegraph office to send a telegram, recounting their encounter with pirates on the way. Some things were delayed on the way, so it was quite normal that they hadn't returned until now. Klein nodded almost imperceptibly and silently returned to room 312, going back to the washroom. He skillfully closed the door, drew a paper figure, disguised himself, and came above the gray fog, preparing to do another divination. Bansi Harbor is dangerous. Klein held the pendulum and murmured the statement. After repeating it over and over, he opened his eyes. The citrine pendant was rotating clockwise, with a small amplitude and slow speed. There is danger, but not great. Just like the previous revelation, Klein rested his elbows on the edge of the bronze long table and fell into thought. The divination result told him the danger was not great, but his intuition told him that the island was very dangerous. Klein didn't know why he had this contradictory intuition, it had never happened before. Divination in reality could be interfered with, but divination above the gray fog had never been wrong, and Klein had never doubted his divination results. Klein was silent for a long time. He had originally planned to wait for Ember to finish exploring the underground ruin and see what the situation was. As for Bansi Harbor, this was just a transit point, and going or not going was fine. His original intention was not to go ashore and avoid trouble as much as possible. But now, Klein took a deep breath, returned to the real world, left the washroom, and found a chair in the living room to sit down, which made Danitz feel inexplicably uneasy. Could Bansi Island really be dangerous? Although he was the one who told Klein the legend, he himself actually doubted the truthfulness of the legend. After all, a legend is just a legend, and their captain had personally explored and found no abnormality on the island. Otherwise, Danitz would not have spoken of the legend so lightly, he just used it as a kind of bragging right. But Gehrman Sparrow's attitude made his heart pound. Because the only impression the other party left on him was madness. But now that even this mad adventurer was starting to think, it meant that there was likely hidden danger on the island. It was because of this unease that Danitz gave up his original idea of going to the Green Lemon restaurant for dinner and honestly stayed on the ship. You stay on the ship. Ah. Danitz felt this was completely unreal. He suddenly understood what the other party wanted to do and blurted out in astonishment. You want to save that captain and those ordinary people. You yourself said it's very dangerous outside. Klein put on his semi-tall silk top hat, picked up his black hardwood cane, and while turning the doorknob, responded calmly. There is danger, but not great. Moreover, they cooperated with me, they kept my secret, he treated me to merman meat. He helped me compensate for the loss of the white shark. Danitz didn't react for a moment and subconsciously asked. How much was the compensation? A few solely. Klein opened the door and walked out. In a hidden church filled with light, there were rows of black chairs with backrests. The only worshipper in the church sat in the center of the first row of chairs. He wore a simple white robe and had a light gold beard that covered the lower half of his face. In a hidden church filled with light, the only worshipper stood in front of a 100-meter-tall cross. In front of the cross, a blurry giant figure stood there, bearing everything, looking down on all spirits with compassion. And within it, there were rows of black chairs with backrests, but there was only one worshipper. He sat in the center of the first row, wearing a very simple white robe, with a light gold beard covering the lower half of his face, his hands clasped in front of the silver cross pendant on his chest, his expression gentle and calm. Step, step. A tall figure burning with sparks appeared at the church entrance at some point. He stepped in, step by step, arriving in front of the worshipper. He said coldly, "My ember has lost contact." The worshipper did not look up, only said softly, "I gave it to Medici, he needed a body to move around." He didn't speak, silently turned and left, accepting the worshipper's explanation. In this world, most specters are the products of the death of high-sequence powerhouses. Because when high-sequence powerhouses consume potions and gain divinity, their spiritual bodies have already undergone fundamental changes, which means that even after death and the dissipation of power, their spiritual bodies will still have remnants. And a small number of specters are specters who have broken through their own limitations through various opportunities, but there is no essential difference between the two. Normally, specters will gradually weaken over time until they completely disappear, but they can assimilate the area where they were born, allowing the spirit world and even the underworld to merge with it, drawing power from it to maintain their existence. Therefore, many specters have their own territories and ranges of activity. It's not that they don't want to leave, but that they can't, unless they accumulate enough power to fundamentally change their form of existence. Of course, specters can also leave this territory by possessing someone. But ordinary people and most extraordinary cannot withstand the extraction of a specter, especially a specter with the status of an angel, formed by the fusion of the remnant souls of 3 sequence 1 after death. Anyone possessed will quickly lose spirituality and body temperature and cannot last long. And a black knight is just a mass of ember, which can be seen as an active empty shell most of the time. And such an empty shell is undoubtedly the most suitable target for a specter to possess, bar none. Especially since the Black Knight's own status is equivalent to a demigod, he can completely withstand the parasitism and extraction of a specter. Of course, this only refers to the Black Knight's body. His soul cannot withstand this extraction and will be completely devoured by the specter. This is exactly why he lost contact with the Black Knight, so he came to the other party for an explanation. After all, to him, a Black Knight is nothing. The power he can command is far more than just this one Black Knight. Trading a drained empty shell for a powerful helper and ensuring the smooth progress of the plan is not a losing deal for him. Creak, crack. As the tall figure left, the church door slowly closed. The worshipper still sat quietly in the center of the first row of pews, not moving an inch and not looking at the departing figure. He suddenly murmured softly. Didn't he notice? The Black Knight was killed, but he didn't notice anything. He only thought that he was truly occupied by Theospectre, causing this empty shell to lose contact with him. In other words, he doesn't know who killed the Black Knight, nor does he know what he did. In other words, the connection between him and Ember is far less close than he imagined. Ember doesn't know of his existence, but he also cannot perceive Ember's state. They are competing for the ownership of the transferring fire, so they must isolate each other's influence. This is why he is so eager for Ember to transferring fire, only then can he re-establish contact with that body. Their state is similar to his own, but even more distant. The worshipper slowly raised his head, looking at the giant luminous cross standing in front, which was hundreds of meters high. In front of the cross, a blurry giant figure stood there, bearing everything, looking down on all spirits with compassion. That was him, and also he. But no matter what, they are ultimately the same person. The divergence between them is only the struggle between divinity and humanity for dominance. Regardless of how the situation changes and develops, this struggle is only between the two of them and will not allow outsiders to interfere. But the relationship between Ember and him is more like that of mortal enemies. He knows everything about Ember, but has also severed all connection with Ember, which may be the price he paid to break free. Ember doesn't know of his existence, but holds absolute initiative in the matter of transferring fire, which is also Ember's advantage. This allows both sides to maintain a fragile balance for a long time. So, what exactly is he? The worshipper murmured softly, but no one would give him an answer. Because in this church filled with light, he is always the only one. Of course, he has plenty of time to figure all this out and is not in a hurry. The other party's identity is not important, and their cooperation is not important. What is important is that everything is proceeding according to plan. With the Black Knight's obstruction, he believes Ember should realize something. A one-sided advantage does not meet his expectations. He needs both sides to maintain a certain degree of balance, but also needs to break this balance. Only then can he have room to intervene. Chapter 192. Making legends a reality. Unlike continental cities such as Backland, Tingen, and Pritz Harbor, colonial islands like Bansi lack gas. The streetlights on both sides are sparse, with candles encased in glass covers, waiting to be lit. Unfortunately, the wind picked up early today, and according to the customs of Bansi Harbor, people here do not go out on nights with heavy fog and drastic weather changes. This resulted in no one lighting the streetlights that should have emitted light, leaving the roads completely dark, illuminated purely by the faint outlines cast by the scarlet moon, looming in the clouds. Holding a dim yellow lantern, gripping a hardwood cane, and dressed in a long black formal suit, Klein walked quickly along the dark and silent street towards the Green Lemon restaurant, guided by Danitz. Whoosh! Amidst the howling wind, a black shadow suddenly darted out from the fog, instantly pouncing towards the only light source in the darkness. Klein, who was holding the lantern. Without thinking, Klein swung his arm and forearm back, fiercely drawing out his cane. Bang! As soon as that sudden black shadow approached, it was struck head-on, sent flying back a considerable distance. Splatter! Viscous liquid dripped from the end of the cane onto the ground, leaving a bloody, sticky stain. It was left behind when the cane struck the black shadow. At this moment, Klein also finally saw the true form of that black shadow under the light of the lantern. It was a person. He was entirely crimson, with muscles, blood, and skeleton completely exposed to the air, but the flesh was incomplete, with an uneven surface. It was as if the skin taker's technique was poor, taking away excess flesh. And on the inner side of his thigh, there was a noticeable indentation, where the flesh had completely disappeared. It was as if someone had cut off a piece from the fattest, part, leaving only bone still attached with some muscle and sinew. He slowly crawled up from the ground. Without the protection of skin, his viscous flesh was covered in dust and grit from the ground, and blood kept dripping down his body, leaving a wet, sticky stain. And at the connection to his neck, the head that should have been there was gone, leaving only that thin, bright red membrane, connected and supported by a ring of flesh and trachea, swaying precariously in the wind, as if it could fall off at any moment. That intense visual impact brought the most visceral fear and horror. Skin taker messenger. Almost subconsciously, this word simultaneously appeared in the minds of Klein and Danitz. Because the horrific state of this person being skinned gave them such a strong sense of déjà vu, it almost instantly connected them to the legendary hidden organization, Skin Taker Messenger, known for their pleasure in skinning. Damn it, the legend is true. I shouldn't have come ashore with this lunatic. Danitz's mood instantly sank, and he cursed inwardly. But cursing was one thing, he didn't know when a classic revolver had appeared in his hand, his elbow pressed down, ready to fire at any moment. At this moment, he saw a pure, clear light descend from the sky, landing on the skinned monster that had fallen to the ground. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. His flesh was scorched and boiled, the monster's body rapidly evaporated and dissolved, turning to ash and smoke, leaving no trace behind. The sun pathway. No, it should be a mystical item. Danitz watched this scene with some surprise, secretly pondering Gehrman Sparrow's methods in his heart. But when he came back to his senses, he suddenly realized that the surrounding light seemed to have dimmed considerably. Looking up again, he realized that Gehrman Sparrow hadn't waited for him at all. Holding his cane and lantern, he was jogging towards the distance, his black formal suit slightly flaring behind him. And with his departure, Danitz was completely exposed to the darkness. Shit. Wait for me, wait for me. Danitz's pupils contracted, and he strode quickly to catch up, not daring to stay alone in the thin fog and dim environment. Above Bansi Island, cyan green pea vines hung down from the sky, weaving into a lush and dense forest in the air. The top of this forest could not be seen looking upwards. Vines formed different paths, interlacing or spiraling, extending high into the sky. Inside the forest, green plants were connected to form hammock-like seats, gently swaying at a high altitude. A lady with waist-length chestnut hair, wearing an olive-green long dress and an old-fashioned black soft hat, sat on one, her calves in black leather boots gently swinging. Thin checkered gauze veiled her face, but her pair of azure eyes kept watching below, watching Klein Moretti, who was holding the lantern. She asked softly, "Do you want me to make a move?" "No." A petite doll sat on her shoulder and said softly, "We just need to observe." To break through the barrier of this world, she had thrown down many volunteers, and the Skin Apostle were among them. But unlike the Dark Race, T, who would be immediately encircled and suppressed upon appearance, the Skin Apostle successfully survived. However, this was not part of her plan. She had never considered that these thrown-down creatures could survive, because the gods of this world could not tolerate the pollution of any foreign species. But the Skin Apostle successfully survived and even developed to a certain extent. She wanted to know why. Inside the Green Lemon restaurant, the wealthy merchant Branch looked at his bodyguard, Clevis, with some hesitation. Mr. Fox, the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant, suggested they stay the night here, because according to the island's customs, it is best not to go out and not answer knocks on the door on nights with heavy fog and drastic weather changes in Bansi. Branch felt that they should respect the local customs. Staying for one night wouldn't delay their itinerary, as the White Agate would only set sail tomorrow. But his daughter, Donna, seemed very eager to return to the ship. She seemed filled with fear of this place. Although Erdi thought this was just a child's imagination, he couldn't help but feel a trace of unease in his heart. Clevis remained silent for a while under his employer's gaze. According to his original experience, at this time, he should follow Mr. Fox's advice and stay the night at the Green Lemon restaurant, but he remembered Gehrman Sparrow's warning, there were hidden dangers in Bansi Harbor. Clevis quickly made a decision and spoke after some deliberation. "Mr. Branch, please trust my professionalism. If there is a problem, staying here will be more dangerous. There are cannons on the ship, and sailors with guns and knives." "All right." Erdi was already hesitant, and this reason hit the mark, completely convincing him. He motioned for Clevis to open the door, and the group left the restaurant step by step. Outside, the wind was low, the darkness was deep, and the fog permeated everything, as if hiding many monsters. This instilled fear, making them almost subconsciously want to return to the restaurant behind them, which offered the protection of light. Clang. However, just at this moment, the restaurant door suddenly closed, making it impossible for them to return. At this moment, they were like ships in a storm, only they were left between heaven and earth. Clevis walked ahead, holding the lantern, when he suddenly saw a figure staggering and pouncing towards them. He subconsciously raised the lantern to get a clear look, but when he truly saw the person's appearance, his pupils suddenly contracted. It was indeed a person, but it was a person without a head, completely wet, with only flesh and skeleton remaining. Even without a head and without skin, he was still alive. This horrifying scene plunged everyone into fear. It was the first time they had seen something so terrifying and bizarre. Clevis was the first to react, subconsciously drawing his revolver to fire. But just as he took out his gun, a thought that terrified him surfaced in Clevis's mind. Could a person, without a head and without skin, truly be killed by a gun? But just at this moment, they saw light. Light descended from the sky, like a blessing and divine punishment sent by an angel, causing that flesh monster to dissolve into nothingness amidst dazzling sound. This, Birdie and the others swallowed with difficulty, their bodies trembling slightly. Just at this moment, they saw a dim yellow light approaching from deep within the fog. It was a figure holding a lantern, his semi-tall silk top hat neat, his double-breasted long formal suit the same color as the night, his face clearly contoured, revealing a distinct sharpness within his sternness. "Uncle Sparrow," Donna and Denton blurted out. They felt their hearts instantly become calm. Klein tossed the lantern to Danitz beside him, walked over with his cane, and said calmly and without abnormality to Clevis and the others. "Let's go to the telegraph office first. What about the Demoto family?" "The Demotos? They are still in the restaurant." Birdie Branch answered subconsciously. "Knock, knock, knock." Klein friendly knocked on the restaurant door, but there was no response from inside. The people inside seemed to be observing the custom of not responding to knocks during heavy fog. After the knocking yielded no result, Gairman Sparrow politely kicked open the restaurant door. He had a brief and friendly exchange with Mr. Fox, the owner of the Green Lemon restaurant, and took away the naive and ignorant newlyweds, the Demoto couple, who were still in the restaurant. Under Klein's lead, they left the restaurant. But they did not return directly to the ship. Instead, they continued towards the telegraph office not far away. Along the way, they encountered several more flesh monsters that had lost their heads and skin. Without exception, they were all easily eliminated by Klein, but this did not lighten his mood. These skinned monsters were not much of a threat, but Klein could vaguely feel that the real danger came from their lost heads and skin. The skin-taker messenger, who cut off their heads and removed their skin, was the true threat. Klein did not want to clash with the members of this hidden organization. He only wanted to find Ailent and then take them back to the ship. The wind grew weaker, the fog remained thin, and the group walked quietly and hastily along the street with no passers-by, sticking closely beside Gairman Sparrow, as if only this could make them feel slightly at ease. Tap, tap, bang. Urgent footsteps and gunshots came from a distance, echoing far down the empty street. Clevis almost subconsciously raised his gun barrel, but was stopped by Klein raising his hand. Clevis raised his head with some confusion and saw Klein shaking his head at him. Although he hesitated, he still lowered his gun barrel. After all, they were alive now entirely thanks to Klein's protection. At this point, they could only trust him. Finally, as the footsteps got closer, a dim light appeared, approaching from deep within the fog, and two figures gradually entered the range of the lantern's illumination. And Klein also saw the appearance of the person in the lead. He was wearing a dark red thick coat and loose white trousers. It was Ailent. However, the captain's ship-shaped hat on his head was gone, and he looked quite disheveled. Ailent also spotted Klein and his group under the lantern's light, but there was no hint of pleasant surprise in his heart. Instead, he shouted in terror. "Quick, run!" Clevis, who was just about to go forward to greet them, paused again and subconsciously looked behind Ailent. Behind him was another figure, a middle-aged man holding a lantern. But his figure was extraordinarily bloated, standing 3 meters tall but looking like a fat person weighing over 2,000 pounds. And this bloat came from the loosely piled fat on his chest and abdomen. And beside him, within the pervasive fog, several dark spheres slowly emerged. Under the illumination of the lantern, they finally saw the appearance of theospheres. They were heads that had lost their bodies, hanging by their esophagi. The heads floated in midair, their faces like shriveled cheese covered in mold spots. The skin, dripping with yellowish-green liquid, was clearly loose and sagging, yet it outlined the shape of the bones. Its nose was reduced to only 2 black holes, its eyes had more white than black and bulged outwards, its lips were mostly rotted away, revealing very sharp, filed teeth mixed with blood. Klein watched the bishop opposite him indifferently. He had just been wondering where the heads of those monsters had gone. Now the answer was obvious. But since the heads had appeared, where had their skins gone? Klein subconsciously looked at the middle-aged man again. This time, as the other party approached, Klein saw even more clearly. He finally saw clearly that this was not a fat person. The loosely piled mass on his chest was not naturally grown fat, but fresh skin sewn together piece by piece. What he was wearing was a robe stitched together from pieces of smooth skin. Grease still remained on the newly peeled skin, reflecting light under the illumination of the lantern, making it look soft and elastic. However, since the other party's skinning technique was not yet proficient, a large amount of flesh was left on the skin during the skinning process, and it was now constantly dripping from the inside of the clothes as the middle-aged man moved. Wearing clothes like this should be very comfortable, right? It was clearly a rather horrifying scene, yet such a thought inexplicably surfaced in the minds of Donna and the others. Skin taker messenger. Danitz also had such a thought, but it was quickly detected and extinguished by him. This sent a chill down his spine and made him truly realize that the legends on this island seemed to be more than just legends. Chapter 193, Wheels Rolling. Skin taker noble. Klein looked at the bloated yet tall figure in front of him, his gaze extremely solemn. Before landing on the island, he had already obtained some information about the skin apostle and skin taker nobles from Ember. Whether they were skin taker nobles or skin apostle, they were all wearing clothes sewn from smooth skin. The only difference was that the thin ones were skin apostle, and the fat ones were skin taker nobles. And regardless of whether they were fat or thin, their height and build far exceeded that of ordinary people. Because whether they were skin apostle or skin taker nobles, in the final analysis, they were not humans, but naturally born, mythical creatures. And the strength of a mythical creature was at least sequence 4 or higher. According to the world's division of strength, skin apostle roughly correspond to sequence 4 saints, while skin taker nobles are complete mythical creatures, corresponding to sequence 2 angels. Ember's words appeared in Klein's mind, and his nerves were taut. Let alone a skin taker noble corresponding to an angel, he couldn't even deal with a Stormwind bandit, corresponding to a saint. If he accidentally encountered one, he would have to choose a better burial plot for himself to ensure his corpse remained intact. Captain Alant finally ran to their side, panting heavily. Be careful, he is Bishop Miller, he was bewitched by an evil god, and the church's priests, servants, and even extraordinaries have all been killed by him. Bishop Miller. Klein's eyes flickered, and he instantly let out a sigh of relief inwardly, the burden on his shoulders suddenly lightened considerably. He had actually guessed earlier that the skin taker noble in front of him was not a true skin taker noble. For example, the skin sewn onto his body was constantly dripping blood, indicating that his skinning technique was extremely poor, likely his first time doing it. Moreover, even the set of equipment on him was incomplete. For example, the skin taker noble shown by Ember had a hood on his head, while the other party still had a human head, even exposed directly. Compared to a skin taker noble with a complete mythical creature form, this was a vast difference. So, this was likely just an imitator of a skin taker noble. It was understandable when you thought about it. After all, hundreds of years ago, the Pope of the Storm Church personally took action, and the Church of the Night also launched a joint encirclement and suppression. Even if the skin taker nobles were truly angels, under the joint encirclement and suppression of the two great churches, it would be difficult for even angels to survive by chance. It was just that before this, these were all just guesses. And getting Alant's personal confirmation made the big stone hanging in Klein's heart finally drop. A bishop of the Storm Church, no matter how strong, would not exceed sequence 5. Bishops in some remote small towns were even just low sequence extraordinaries. Because even within the Storm Church, sequence 5 extraordinaries were extremely rare. Such people could be said to have boundless futures, and the probability of being assigned to Bansi Island was not high, as this place clearly looked like a desolate and harsh land. In other words, the probability of the opponent being sequence 6 was relatively high. Even if the opponent now believed in an evil god and received some blessings. But Klein also had a large number of magical items in his hand, such as creeping hunger. Which meant, the advantage is mine. Klein took a deep breath, and confidence reoccupied the high ground. The divination results showed that the danger was not great, which meant that the possibility of the danger being so great that he couldn't handle it was small. Although the Bishop Miller's physique was extremely oppressive, his actual strength might not be as intimidating as his size suggested. Thinking of this, Klein immediately said, Captain Alant, take them and find a place to hide. Okay. Alant heard the words of this mad adventurer, took a deep breath, nodded solemnly, and motioned for the others to run towards a nearby alley. Danitz glanced at the others and suddenly said, Can you handle it alone? Klein glanced at him, causing Danitz to shrink his head back. Ho ho. The 3-meter-tall Bishop Miller made no movement, but those rotten heads seemed unable to restrain themselves. They let out beast-like roars, opening their mouths wide and flying towards Klein. And at this moment, a brass light flew out from Klein's hand and shot towards the distance. Clang, 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 the Azak copper whistle fell to the ground, bouncing a few times. With a whoosh, all the heads simultaneously changed direction, rushing towards the spot where the Azak copper whistle stopped. It was as if the copper whistle had a great attraction for them, an attraction that even made them disregard Bishop Miller's command. At the same time, a holy light appeared out of thin air, shining above the Azak copper whistle, completely enveloping the heads that were pouncing towards the whistle. Yet, these rotten heads seemed to feel no threat, still opening their mouths wide to bite at the Azak copper whistle as if to swallow it, but they had no stomachs at all, and even if they ate it, it would just slide out of the esophagus hanging below their heads. However, before they could even touch the copper whistle, the power of the holy light quickly evaporated and dissolved them, turning them into dust and smoke, leaving no trace behind. For these undead monsters, the extraordinary abilities of the sun sequence were their natural enemy. That holy light came from behind Klein, from Danitz holding the sun brooch. Klein already had creeping hunger, and it happened to contain the soul of a light priest, which caused the ability of the sun brooch he had previously bought to overlap with it, making it somewhat redundant. Therefore, Klein simply lent the brooch to Danitz. While using the holy light, Danitz also suddenly threw several fireballs towards Bishop Miller. Although Bishop Miller hadn't done anything so far, this didn't change the fact that he was already a monster. And Danitz didn't expect the fireballs he threw to injure Bishop Miller, because these fireballs were prepared for Gehrman Sparrow. Swish. As expected, while the fireballs smashed towards Bishop Miller, Klein's figure also continuously flickered like a ghost between the fireballs. And his distance from Bishop Miller was constantly closing. Bang! The fireballs heavily smashed onto Bishop Miller's body, but the effect was negligible. Not only did the fireballs fail to leave any mark, they couldn't even ignite the seemingly smooth grease on the fresh human skin. But besides these fireballs, there was one fireball that grazed past the bloated and huge Bishop Miller. And Klein's figure also quietly emerged within this fireball, circling around to Bishop Miller's back. However, as soon as he appeared, his pupils suddenly contracted. Because the instant he appeared, a snake-like strip of black shadow suddenly lashed towards his body. That was a thick tail, a tail that had been hidden behind the bloated Bishop Miller the entire time, and which suddenly launched an attack at this moment. Crack! The tail heavily struck Klein, who couldn't dodge in time, but the next second his body quickly flattened and shrank, turning into a thin, tattered paper figure. And Klein's figure had already appeared 2 meters away, his gaze still locked onto Bishop Miller. The glove on his left palm suddenly erupted with the hunger that had been suppressed for a long time, wriggling and growing dark golden scales one by one. Bansi Island, Storm Church. The lady with chestnut waist-length hair and a thin veil covering her face walked through the dark and solemn corridor, through the great prayer hall with an altar and a huge storm holy emblem composed of symbols of strong winds, waves, and thunder, all the way to the underground of the church. Just like the Church of the Knights Chinese Gate, the Storm Church also had similar buildings, used to store various extraordinary materials and sealed artifacts, and also to temporarily detain heretics, mutated species, cultists, and members of secret organizations. And the layout of the underground of any church was basically the same. Thus, Bernadette skillfully entered the underground and found a large door at the end of the passage. Inside the door was a dark room, and a wooden table was placed in the center of the room. But at this moment, this wooden table was covered in mottled blood, and a blood-soaked saw was placed on the tabletop, with a large amount of flesh and skin tissue left from cutting in the saw's crevices. But these were not what Bernadette was looking for, so she bypassed the table and went to the corner. There was a desk there, seemingly for office use. And on the desk, there was a notebook with a blue cover, and the cover was printed with the storm holy emblem composed of symbols of strong winds, waves, and thunder, but at this moment, a large Times was drawn on it with blood. Open it and see, the doll on the lady's shoulder suddenly said. Bernadette nodded slightly, and a green pea vine appeared out of thin air, carefully turning the pages of the notebook. The word, Miller, was written on the title page, which was undoubtedly Bishop Miller's notebook. And under the rapid flipping of the pea vine, Bernadette quickly saw the clues she wanted. Storm above. This is blasphemy, naked blasphemy. On Bansi Island, under the rule of the Storm Church, in the underground of the Storm Church, such horrifying blasphemy is actually hidden. This is simply. The bottom half of the page had obvious tearing marks, and the recorded content had been completely erased. Not only this page, but the next few pages were also completely torn, leaving only jagged paper scraps. And the content of the following diary entries also became completely different from before. Fortunate, God has finally answered my prayer. He has granted me a ritual, allowing me to become a true messenger of God, to carry out His will. In the name of Skin Taker. Praise you, God of Weather. The despicable Storm Church believers have discovered the Lord's secret. This is truly good news. This way, I have a legitimate reason to draw them into the church and have them embrace the Lord. Damn it. He actually refused the Lord's kindness, refused to believe in my Lord, and even threatened to inform the Storm Church. In the name of Skin Taker, what blasphemy. The Lord is tolerant, but the Lord's tolerance is limited. I will punish the sinners on behalf of the Lord. I killed him, killed that foolish pastor who refused the Lord's kindness, killed everyone. To prevent the God's existence from being exposed, I must perform the ritual as soon as possible to welcome the Lord's arrival. Ah, power. Is this the feeling of power? Power is gradually surging into my body. Praise Skin Taker. Praise Skin Taker. The content of the notes was filled with various insane ramblings, mostly meaningless praise and odes, Toshkin Taker, like a diary written by a lunatic, chaotic and disordered. But Bernadette still extracted some useful information from it, which can be summarized as: Bishop Miller discovered something under the Storm Church and considered it blasphemy, preparing to report the matter to the headquarters of the Storm Church. However, something went wrong, perhaps because he was bewitched by an evil god, or for some other reason. But Bishop Miller ultimately chose to abandon his plan to inform and defected to the evil god. And because his belief in the evil god was discovered by a pastor, he went mad and killed everyone. Afterward, he performed a ritual and transformed himself into a Skin Taker messenger, at least that's what Bishop Miller believed. The diary even recorded the ritual to become a Skin Taker messenger. Kill 7 powerful extraordinary, make their skin into a robe, bury their heads in an altar, sacrifice their flesh and blood to the great God of Weather, and use this to pray for the God of Weather's blessing, thus growing into a true Skin Taker messenger. The petite doll said in a calm tone. This is not the birth process of Skin Apostle. The only ritual they need is the Queen's embrace. The birth of Skin Apostle is closely related to the Queen with Twilight Eyes. Upon birth, they receive the embrace of the Queen with Twilight Eyes. Only by being blessed by the Queen with Twilight Eyes and the Black Flames can they grow into true Skin Apostle and become the death of deities. She had cooperated with Skin Apostle and was quite familiar with this process. If described using this world's extraordinary system, every Stormwind bandit is a born mythical creature. Possessing the myriad phases of the furnace, they also possess the purest power. Coupled with the Black Flames empowered by fated death, they are true deity hunters. As for Miller, he was just a monster wearing human skin. His birth had nothing to do with Skin Apostle. Theoretically, that is. But Miller did indeed exhibit some characteristics of the myriad phases of the furnace, which seemed to have been bestowed upon him by the ritual. Bernadette pondered, speaking softly. Skin Apostle suddenly appeared in this world a few hundred years ago. Before that, the primitive religion on Bansi Island worshipped the God of Weather, who was a sequence 2 feet weather warlock, of the hunter pathway. And in the sacrifices of this primitive religion, there were descriptions of sacrificing flesh and blood and burying heads in the altar. The ritual he performed seems to have deliberately combined these two. The one who bewitched Miller and induced him to kill others was undoubtedly the God of Weather, and the one he worshipped was undoubtedly the God of Weather. But why did he get involved with Skin Taker? And where did the myriad phases of the furnace on his body come from? Bernadette furrowed her delicate brows, but suddenly heard the petite doll's calm voice beside her ear. Atavism. The battle continued. Under Bishop Miller's robe made of human skin, slimy, disgusting tentacles suddenly emerged. Slap. These tentacles fiercely slammed the nearby ground and houses. The terrifying force directly shattered the hard stone slab pavement and collapsed the houses. One could imagine that anyone hit by these tentacles would suffer an extremely miserable fate. But just as Klein was wary of the opponent launching a new sneak attack, the tall and bloated Bishop Miller, at this moment, suddenly, tipped over, as if unable to bear the weight of these extra tentacles, and fell to the ground. Klein was surprised, but Bishop Miller suddenly moved again. His human skin instantly collided into a circle, turning him into a giant human wheel about 3 meters in diameter. Driven by an invisible force, it surged rapidly towards Klein not far away. Almost in the blink of an eye, that seemingly bloated and obese body crossed a distance of over 10 meters, and together with the slimy tentacles that were constantly hitting the ground, it was about to crush Klein beneath it. Slap! Klein's body was almost instantly flattened, completely pressed onto the ground, becoming as thin as paper. Danitz's heart leapt to his throat, until he noticed that the flattened Klein had no blood flowing out. That figure as thin as paper instantly turned into a paper figure. Klein's figure reappeared, his gaze fixed on Bishop Miller, who was rolling into the distance and beginning to circle back, his expression extremely solemn. The opponent's speed was simply too fast. He looked incredibly bloated, yet he almost failed to react. Even if he did react, he didn't have time to dodge. If not for the paper figure substitute, he would probably be crushed into a meat patty by now. As long as they weren't from the diviner pathway or the apprentice pathway with the ability to flash, sequence 6 or even sequence 5 from other pathways might not be able to escape this roll. No wonder Ember specifically reminded him on the Fool to be particularly careful of the rolling wheel move. This move seemed simple, but in reality, every step was breathtaking. Rumble. A huge roar resounded wantonly in the silent night sky. The heavy human wheel rolled quickly through the street, and any stone slab it crushed quickly cracked, with dense, spiderweb-like fissures covering the entire street. And as if sensing that Klein was still alive, the obese wheel actually turned a corner and rolled back. Bang! 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 The originally sturdy walls were instantly smashed through, sending broken bricks and stones flying everywhere. But Bishop Miller's momentum didn't decrease, and he smashed through another wall, followed by the next house, and another house. After consecutively smashing through 6 houses, Bishop Miller finally completed his turn, directing his rolling path towards Klein again. Although Klein had extra paper figures to use, and the attack was fierce, the threat wasn't actually too great. But Klein had no idea if this rolling wheel move had a limit, and he couldn't afford to keep using substitutes. Klein's eyes narrowed, and his left hand glowed with brilliant light. Immediately after, he leaned back, spread his arms, as if embracing the sun. A thick, pure, and fiery beam of light descended from the sky, landing on Bishop Miller and completely enveloping him. Sequence 5, Light Priest. The surroundings became like daytime, but Bishop Miller continued to roll. He stubbornly withstood the purification of the holy light, rolling madly towards Klein. He knew very well that as long as he killed Klein, this holy light would also disappear. Bang! Bishop Miller smashed through a wall and crashed into a house, getting stuck in the wall. He seemed to lose momentum, unable to roll anymore, his tentacles weakly slapping the ground. But before that, he had already firmly crushed Klein into a meat patty thinner than paper. However, this time it was still a paper figure. Klein expressionlessly raised his glove and applied another beam of holy light to Bishop Miller. Finally, under the continuous purification of the holy light, Bishop Miller's body began to evaporate, first the skin, then the tentacles, and finally the flesh and blood. By the time the brilliant pillar of light disappeared, all that was left on the ground was a thin robe made of human skin, and beneath the robe, a puddle of writhing tentacles and flesh and blood. The tentacles were slapping the ground while propping up the robe, attempting to put it back on. Even at this point, Bishop Miller was not dead. His vitality was unprecedentedly tenacious. But this just happened to benefit Klein, because he needed to feed creeping hunger. Klein walked towards Bishop Miller, extending his gloved left palm. At the center of the glove's palm, a slit silently opened, from which grew 2 rows of illusory, bone-white teeth, frantically swallowing the remaining flesh, bones, and spirituality of Bishop Miller. Eventually, only a robe remained on the ground, a robe made of human skin. Crack! The 2 rows of teeth that had grown from the glove suddenly bit down fiercely on a corner of the robe. Chapter 194, Special Train. Perhaps because the fallen Bishop Miller had been eliminated, Klein and the others did not encounter any monster obstructions on their way back. After walking for an unknown distance, they finally saw the dock and the white agate, from which candlelight shone through the portholes. Klein, holding his blood-stained cane, stood guard below until everyone had boarded. Only then did he pull himself up and leap onto the deck in a few steps. Without concealing it, Klein took out a gold coin and muttered softly, "There is danger on the white agate." Clink. The gold coin flew up, then turned and fell back into Klein's palm, heads down. This indicated a negative result. Klein's heart did not relax in the slightest, but he still nodded subtly to Captain Aylant. Aylant also breathed a sigh of relief, but to be safe, he still gathered his subordinates, such as the second mate, navigator, and gunnery officer, and had them organize the sailors, adjust the cannons, and prepare to set sail at any time. Although departing at night posed a considerable safety hazard, if the situation clearly worsened, it would be the most effective way to avoid danger. As for why there was no first mate, it was because the first mate had unfortunately died at the church. Klein turned and returned to the cabin, politely declining the thanks and invitations of others on the grounds that he needed to rest. Under Danitz's strange gaze, he entered the washroom and performed another divination above the gray fog. The results were mixed. Bansi Island still had hidden dangers, and the danger had escalated from not great to great, meaning it posed a life-threatening risk to him. But the white agate was safe and there was no danger. This finally allowed Klein to relax slightly, and at the same time, he decided to contact Ember and convey his experience through prayer. The encounter on Bansi Island gave Klein a strong sense of crisis. This island was definitely much more dangerous than he had imagined. In any case, he would never set foot on this small island again. What Klein didn't know, however, was that Ember was currently enjoying dinner at the Hall family's luxurious villa. In the dining room, Earl Hall's family sat around the dining table, and the maids were busy placing delicious dishes on the table one after another. Taking advantage of a lull in the dinner, Ember slowly spoke. Earl Hall, I have to go on a business trip to the Intis Republic in a couple of days, so I might not be able to continue performing my duties during this time. Audrey frowned slightly, hesitatingly saying, business trip to Intis, so sudden. Ember was currently cutting a medium-rare steak smeared with black pepper sauce. It lay on the porcelain plate, emitting a little steam, and as the steak knife cut through it, it revealed a side where some myoglobin still remained. He forked a piece of beef and put it into his mouth. The dim yellow light cast a warm glow on the artistic coffee table and exquisite tableware. The faint aroma of fried steak permeated the air, and this steak, produced from the Hall family's own ranch, had a truly wonderful taste. Hearing the young girl's question, Ember briefly explained. It's an urgent mission. I'll be taking the earliest steam train tomorrow morning. Earl Hall pondered for 2 seconds and asked, how long will it take? About half a month. I see. Earl Hall thought for a moment, then said with a smile, coincidentally, I have some friends over in Intis. Well, how about this, I'll write you a letter later. If you encounter trouble in Intis, you can take the letter to the Susit Bank for help. They won't refuse. The reason he dared to say this was because Earl Hall was not only the 4th largest shareholder of the Backland Bank, but also the 3rd largest shareholder of the Susit Bank. To some extent, the Susit Bank could be compared to the Backland Bank. And it should be known that in the Ruined Kingdom, interbank transfers within the same city are handled through a centralized bill clearing system. But unlike their counterparts in the Intis Republic, not all banks here can join this system. The 7 largest banks firmly control this right, so they are also called clearing banks, forcing other banks to rely on them. And the Backland Bank is one of the 7 major banks, and the largest one among them. The largest shareholder of the bank is the royal family, and Earl Hall is the 4th largest shareholder. In fact, taking advantage of the recent favorable conditions, Earl Hall has seized the opportunity to acquire a considerable number of shares. He is now the 3rd largest shareholder and even shows signs of becoming the 2nd largest shareholder. And the fact that Susit Bank can be compared to Backland Bank, one of the 7 major banks in the Ruined Kingdom, shows its strength. As for the friends Earl Hall mentioned, they are actually distant relatives of the Hall family. Intis and Ruin often have intermarriages, and many noble families are related, especially the followers of Steam. Of course, although the 2 sides are relatives, they belong to different countries after all, and their feelings may not be that deep. Therefore, Earl Hall did not suggest that Ember ask them for help, as these people might not be as useful as the Susit Bank. All right. Ember nodded slightly, not refusing. Although he felt that he probably wouldn't need the help of the Susit Bank, it was a gesture of goodwill, and he wouldn't be ungrateful. Ash. Hilbert took a sip of the fragrant cream soup and said, if you go to the Intis Kingdom, try not to deal with the followers of the eternal blazing sun. They are not friendly to the followers of the night. Ember was slightly surprised and asked, oh, why? I only know that the eternal blazing sun church and the storm church are mutually hostile. I don't know. Hilbert shook his head and explained, perhaps it is because of the storm church that the eternal blazing sun church also harbors hostility towards the night church, which also preaches in the Ruined Kingdom. Earl Hall did not speak, but he tacitly approved of his eldest son's explanation. The 7 Orthodox Gods churches are also divided into different factions, which can be seen from the countries they are located in. For example, the Night Church and the Storm Church have the best relationship, followed by the Steam Church, so these 3 great churches can openly preach in the Ruined Kingdom. The next level is the Earth Mother Church. The Earth Mother Church can preach in ruin, but can only maintain a small number of churches. On the other hand, the Church of the God of War is completely incompatible with the Night Church. Of course, this is also true for the Church of the God of War. The Church of the God of War has the best relationship with the Earth Mother Church, followed by the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, and is mutually hostile with the Night Church. And perhaps due to the principle of hating the house and everything in it, the relationship between the Church of the God of War and the Storm Church is also very ordinary. Of course, this may also be because both sides are hot-tempered. And this also applies to the Eternal Blazing Sun Church. This denomination is on good terms with the Church of the God of War and hostile to the Storm Church. This means that the Night Church is both a friend's enemy and an enemy's friend to the Eternal Blazing Sun Church. With the added weight of these dual identities, it is naturally impossible to expect the Eternal Blazing Sun Church to be particularly friendly towards the Night Church. Although they will not be treated as cultists in the Intis Kingdom like the followers of the Lord of Storms, discrimination and targeting of the followers of Night are certainly unavoidable. Similarly, don't expect the Eternal Blazing Sun Church to receive good treatment in the Night Church. In the Ruined Kingdom, followers of the Eternal Blazing Sun will also be treated as cultists. Audrey suddenly asked curiously. Perhaps it's also due to doctrinal reasons. The honorific name of the Eternal Blazing Sun includes Undying Light, which happens to be contrary to the goddess of the night. Perhaps. Hilbert shrugged, indicating that he didn't know the answer either. How could he, a Sequence 9 who had only recently become an extraordinary, know the secrets of the two major churches? Hilbert earnestly instructed. In short, in the Intis Republic, always be cautious. Ember nodded slightly, then said, Earl Hall, I have a friend who is also an excellent extraordinary. While I'm on my business trip to Intis, she might be able to substitute for me in teaching Audrey for a while. Hilbert's expression suddenly became strange. Friend, she. Earl Hall fell into thought. This was indeed a good idea. Ember was not only Audrey's teacher, responsible for teaching her knowledge of the extraordinary world, but also Audrey's personal bodyguard, responsible for protecting her safety. And Ember's friend, presumably, would not be too weak in strength and could protect Audrey's safety. Intis Republic. Audrey whispered the words to herself, and a strong impulse suddenly surged in her heart. She said in a low voice, can I go with you too? Go where? Hilbert didn't react for a moment, then realized she was talking about the Intis Republic. Nonsense. Hilbert frowned and reprimanded, from Backland to visit Trier, the capital of the Intis Republic, it will take at least 4 or 5 days on the road, which is 10 days round trip. You'll have to stay on the steam train for those 10 days, can you handle that? What's more, who knows what will happen along the way? What if you encounter danger? Isn't Ash here? Audrey blinked, a hint of slyness flashing in her eyes. He will protect me, or are you saying, brother, that you don't trust Ash? Hilbert paused for a moment. Earl Hall also frowned, clearly hesitant. On one hand, Audrey is already an adult, and she has the right to do what she likes. But on the other hand, Audrey is still his daughter after all, and in his heart, she is still a little girl who hasn't grown up and needs her parents' protection. His rationality told him to let go, but his emotions felt that Audrey should stay by his side, as it would be safer. But honestly, could he really protect Audrey's safety? Being by his side was, in fact, not as safe as being by Ember's side. After all, he was just an ordinary earl, while Ember was a powerful extraordinary. As for danger, would there be no danger staying in Backland? Even returning to the family's fiefdom would still be dangerous, it would be safer with Ash's protection instead. After a long silence, Earl Hall slowly said, If you want to go, then go. Father. Hilbert frowned, while Audrey showed a look of delight. Earl Hall noticed his eldest son's gaze and gently shook his head, sighing with emotion. Audrey has grown up. It's time for her to go out more and broaden her horizons. Pausing for a moment, Earl Hall smiled again. Of course, the premise is if Ash doesn't mind taking her with him. Upon hearing this, Audrey immediately cast a hopeful and expectant look at Ember. Ember met the young girl's gaze and shrugged helplessly. Of course, I don't mind. Yay. Audrey clenched her small fists and waved them excitedly. Struck by the huge surprise, she almost couldn't control her emotions and nearly jumped up in excitement. Although she held back, mindful of her image as a lady, her fair, crystal-like feet in her shoes also gently swayed in the air, revealing her true feelings. Hum. Audrey hummed a happy little tune softly, feeling quite joyful. Although she was an audience, a mid-sequence extraordinary at Sequence 7 about to advance to Sequence 6, she was also Miss Audrey, a noble lady. It was quite reasonable to be a little willful in front of her father and brother occasionally, wasn't it? January 10th, Backland Train Station. Woo. The steam train head spewing a large amount of smoke dragged carriage after carriage and rattled into Backland Station, slowing down until it stopped. Executor Eakins, with his messy hair, and several Mechanical Heart members walked into carriage number 3, which was filled with luxurious compartments, and found their respective rooms according to their tickets. Thump thump thump. Executor Eakins put away his luggage, but not long after the train left the platform. He quickly left his room again and knocked on the door of the compartment labeled No. 1. Please come in. A cheerful young girl's voice came from inside, but Executor Eakins did not push the door open. Because the next second, a maid opened the compartment door and respectfully invited him in. Entering the compartment, Executor Eakins immediately saw the three people inside. The Miss Maid who opened the door for him, wearing a black and white maid uniform. Ember, wearing his unchanging formal attire, sitting on the long sofa by the aisle, looking through today's newspaper while eating snacks. And the noble young girl, wearing a beige court dress, sitting on the single armchair by the window, maintaining an elegant posture, holding a cup of black tea in both hands, and occasionally taking a small sip. She was gazing at the scenery outside the window, and a well-behaved golden retriever was squatting beside her, shoes adorned with ribbon roses. Executor Eakins looked at the golden retriever with a hint of envy. It wasn't that he envied it being able to squat by the young girl's feet like a dog, he mainly envied its price. A well-trained hunting dog costs between 450 and 700 pounds. Although this amount was nothing to an Executor Eakins's weekly salary was at least over 100 pounds, which wasn't low. But this didn't stop him from feeling a pang in his heart about the dog's price. He certainly wouldn't buy such a dog. Ember also put down the newspaper in his hand at this moment and asked with some doubt. Is there something, Executor Eakins? Executor Eakins withdrew his gaze and explained. It's like this. From Backlund to Trier, the capital of the Intis Republic, it will take about 4 or 5 days. Along the way, we will pass through Ahova County, Janai County, and Civilis Shire of the Ruined Kingdom. When passing through Constant and Delhi's in the Intis Republic, we may need to stop for a day each to handle some matters. Will you stop and wait for us then, or will you go ahead to Trier? If you go ahead, I will send a message to Trier to have them prepare in advance. After Executor Eakins finished speaking, he looked at Ember and stood in place, waiting for his answer. Ember didn't show any reaction but looked at the young girl by the window and asked. Audrey, what do you think? Audrey blinked and said seriously. It's just stopping for 1 day, isn't it? Let's stay together. I also want to spend a day in Constant and Delhi's. However, Audrey thought for a moment and asked hesitantly, Annie, do I have any property in Constant? Annie was Audrey's personal maid, and after she came of age, Annie would also serve as her housekeeper. As an excellent maid trained by the Hall family since childhood, Annie was fully capable of being a housekeeper. Annie also thought for a moment and gave a serious reply. Yes, Miss Audrey. Earl Hall is the second largest shareholder of the Constant Coal and Steel Consortium. He also has some subsidiary properties under his name, which were transferred to your name after you came of age. I see. Audrey nodded thoughtfully. In fact, she had quite a lot of property under her name, and she rarely counted exactly what they were. Executor Eakins's eye twitched slightly, feeling the disparity of the world once again. Although as a mid-sequence extraordinary and an executor of the steam church, he was a high-income earner, compared to true great nobles, he was still more than a little bit behind. For example, Earl Hall was a well-known great noble far and wide. Constant is the capital of Janai County, also known as Wind City. This is an area with extremely developed coal and steel industries, ranking among the top 3 cities in the Ruined Kingdom. And Constant itself is also one of the most famous heavy industrial cities in the Ruined Kingdom. To guard against the Fosak Empire to the north, it not only has complete shipyards and coastal defenses but also an intersea fleet permanently stationed in Constant, making it virtually impregnable. The Constant Coal and Steel Consortium controls almost all the coal and steel industries in this area and also monopolizes military orders. As long as the intersea fleet or coastal defenses have new orders, they will definitely be given to the Constant Coal and Steel Consortium. And as the second largest shareholder of this giant enterprise, Earl Hall's influence in Constant is evident. Although Audrey could not inherit the status of this second largest shareholder, the properties Earl Hall left to her alone were already terrifying enough. Ember saw that Executor Eakins seemed a bit awkward and spoke up to help him out. Executor Eakins, you don't need to worry about us. You can go and attend to your own matters. All right, I won't disturb you then. Relieved, Executor Eakins immediately let out a sigh, bowed slightly, and backed out of the room. Audrey suddenly asked, Annie, can you help me get some snacks? Looking at the table full of snacks in front of Ember, she added, the kind for Susie, she's a bit greedy. Woof. Susie tilted her head in confusion, her tail wagging gently. Was she greedy? Actually, she wasn't very greedy. She was just curious about this trip. All right. Annie respectfully agreed without any hesitation and turned to leave the room. Audrey organized her thoughts and said softly. Ember, I always feel like Executor Eakins is a bit strange. Ember pondered for 2 seconds and slowly said. It's normal for him to be strange. He's gay. Gay. Audrey blinked curiously. He likes men, Ember explained concisely. Quote. Audrey's mouth was slightly agape, and even Susie, who was squatting by her feet, opened her mouth wide. Clearly, both mistress and servant were stunned. This had completely exceeded their common understanding. Chapter 195, Praise the Fool. Bansi. Amidst the whistle of the white agate starting, the passenger ship slowly sailed away from Bansi Island, where they had spent a night like a nightmare yesterday. Klein sat on the sofa chair by the window, gazing at Bansi Island, which was getting smaller and smaller in his view, and muttered to himself. He had already revealed the relevant information to Ember last night, believing that the other party should have gone to explore that underground ruin. However, he did not respond to his plea, conveyed through Mr. Fool last night, probably not wanting to trouble Mr. Fool too much, but rather waiting until today's Tarot Club meeting to discuss it. Whether or not this was the case, at least Klein thought so. However, while Ember was there to resolve the matter of the underground ruin, Bansi Island could not be ignored either. Such a small island actually gathered elements like the Skin-Taker Messenger, God of Weather, Redemption Rose, Angel King, and many others simultaneously. It was simply like a hodgepodge. Moreover, judging from last night's experience, these cults, at least the believers of the Skin-Taker Messenger and the God of Weather, actually maintained a strange balance. Didn't they say it had been cleared centuries ago? Why is there still danger appearing now? Are the people from the Storm Church just freeloaders? The Punishers who came during the day were also clearly not very professional. They didn't even ask about the whereabouts of the human skin robe Bishop Miller was wearing, only assuming it had been destroyed in the battle. It was clearly impossible to rely on these Punishers to resolve the crisis. They probably didn't know as much as Danitz. Based on this, only one thought remained in Klein's mind. Report it quickly. If they don't report it, are they going to keep them for the new year in 1351? At sea, they definitely couldn't count on the Church of the Night or Ember. Firstly, the distance was too far, and Ember might not be willing to make this trip. Secondly, the Church of the Night's power at sea was indeed not as strong as the Storm Churches. The mainland was the focus of the Church of the Night's missionary work. Moreover, to completely resolve the crisis on Bansi Island, at least one angel would need to come in person. But the overseas islands could be said to be the Storm Church's base camp. What would the Storm Church think if an angel from the Church of the Night descended? Would they think the Storm Church was incapable of solving the problem, or that they were ignoring the Storm Church's territory and trying to forcibly intervene? So, in the end, the only one who could truly handle this matter was the Storm Church. As for how to report it, Klein also had a plan in mind. He wasn't so foolish as to tell Ailent directly or write an anonymous letter to the Storm Church. That would attract many unnecessary troubles. The most reliable approach was to wait for the Tarot Club meeting, have Mr. World mention the abnormality in Bansi Harbor, and then have the Fool casually bring up the Redemption Rose and the Angel King. This would both enrich the common knowledge of the Tarot Club members and secretly reveal the information to the Hanged Man. Undoubtedly, the Hanged Man, being a member of the Storm Church, was ambitious. He wouldn't give up this opportunity to gain merit. Perfect. However, there was one small problem. Klein lowered his head and examined the black glove on his left palm. It was the Creeping Hunger. Undoubtedly, the ability of this magical item was very useful, even more so than the demigod-level magical item Ember gave him. But the only problem was that the side effect of the Creeping Hunger was its craving for flesh and soul. The Creeping Hunger had to be satisfied with the soul and flesh of a living person every day, otherwise it would use its owner instead. Even though Mr. Azik had placed a certain seal on the Creeping Hunger, it only needed to be fed with the soul and flesh of a living person within 24 hours after use. If that didn't work, Klein could also throw it onto the gray fog, which would naturally calm its appetite. But even so, the Creeping Hunger's craving for flesh and soul still existed in its essence and was trying to manifest itself. Just like last night, Klein did intend to feed Bishop Miller's flesh and blood to the Creeping Hunger as payment for using it. But the Creeping Hunger, which should have been satisfied after eating one person, did not fall silent as he wished. Instead, it unexpectedly ate that human skin robe. It was so fast that even Klein couldn't react. Even though Klein tried to intervene and stop it, he still couldn't interrupt the process, because at that time the Creeping Hunger even showed subtle signs of losing control, which made Klein not dare to act rashly. Only after it ate that human skin robe did it return to silence. This also caused Klein to have to change his story, claiming to Ailent and Danitz that Bishop Miller had been annihilated under the holy light. But fortunately, no one else suspected anything, and even the punishers who came to investigate didn't inquire about the details of that human skin robe. And after the creeping hunger ate that human skin robe, it also showed some abnormalities. It seemed to be undergoing some changes. The creeping hunger was originally a glove made of human skin, which could change into different colors depending on the ability used. But no matter how it changed, it could only be the size of a glove, only covering one palm. But after devouring that human skin, Klein could feel that it could extend more parts, enough to cover the whole body. But Klein did not act rashly, nor did he try to experiment with this ability. The creeping hunger was already trying to eat him, its owner, at all times. If he really let it cover his whole body directly, wouldn't that be purely fulfilling its desire? And it's worth mentioning that this covering the whole body ability did not belong to the hurting ability. None of the 5 souls hurted by the creeping hunger were replaced. This ability seemed to have become an extension of the magical item itself. Whether this change was good or bad, Klein had no way of predicting. He could only write to Mr. Isaac for help, trying to get some answers from Mr. Isaac. Of course, it wasn't that he hadn't done divination on the gray fog. And the results showed that there was danger, but it wasn't great. The danger should be that it can eat me faster, right? Klein rubbed his temples, inevitably feeling a headache about this. Theoretically, as long as the creeping hunger's craving for soul and flesh was satisfied, it wouldn't backlash against the user. But if it broke through the seal set by Mr. Isaac and returned to the state where it needed to eat one person every day, Klein would have to seal it on the gray fog and no longer use it. In the afternoon, in Ahova County, a special train heading for the Intis Republic sped along the tracks. This special train was sponsored by the Steam Church in Backland as a favor, and Ember and Audrey didn't spend a penny. Correspondingly, Audrey also couldn't fill the train with servants from the Hall family like she did when returning to their fiefdom in Eastchester County in previous years. On this trip, she only brought her personal maid Annie. And Susie. However, Audrey didn't feel dissatisfied about not being able to bring too many servants. Instead, she felt a bit relaxed. One should know that normally she needed 5 or 6 maids to help her even change clothes, and Audrey actually didn't like that kind of life. That wasn't out of her own will, but it was a symbol of a noble's dignity, and she couldn't disobey it. It's really nice. Audrey looked at the scenery flashing past outside the window and said softly, "This is the first time I've had an experience like this. In fact, when I was little, I always longed for a similar experience, and even fantasized about traveling around the world." The special train had already left the vicinity of Backland and entered the adjacent Ahova County. But even the countryside of Ahova County, which was close by, was so novel to Audrey. Ember sat on the other side, and upon hearing this, he asked with a smile, "Don't you return to Eastchester County every year? How can you call this the first time? It's different." Audrey gently shook her head and said very seriously, "Although I return to Eastchester County every year, even when I return to Eastchester County, I'm only on the family's territory. These two are completely different experiences." After Audrey finished speaking, she suddenly felt a little guilty, because she shouldn't have been the one to say this. According to the customs of the Ruined Kingdom, nobles with fiefdoms would leave Backland 1 week after the New Year's ball and return to their territories to enjoy a pleasant country or castle life, and only return to the capital in June to begin their daily social activities. And Earl Hall was no exception. Their original plan was to return to their fiefdom in Eastchester County. But due to the king's death and Alfred's demigod qualification, Earl Hall had to stay in Backland and worry about state affairs. And while Earl Hall was worrying about state affairs, the Countess also needed to be responsible for the normal operation of the family's affairs. Similarly, Alfred held a demigod spot, so he naturally couldn't leave Backland. And Hilbert was also in a critical period of ascent. He had to seize the opportunity presented by Earl Hall being deeply trusted by George IV, do his utmost to prove himself, and achieve something. And Audrey, she also needed to act as an intermediary, acquiring a large number of potion formulas, extraordinary characteristics, and extraordinary materials for the Hall family. Therefore, the entire Hall family had no plans to leave Backland this year. This certainly made them quite busy, but it also meant that the Hall family's status would achieve a huge leap. And under these circumstances, Audrey was the only one who could enjoy a holiday and travel. The personal maid Annie earnestly reminded her, "Miss, this is not just a trip. The Countess hopes you can learn more from this trip, and you need to come up with a complete plan during this time. And when you return to Backland, you will need to begin putting your plan into practice." Audrey blinked and asked curiously, What about charity?" "Not a bad idea. As for Audrey's casual suggestion, Annie thought about it seriously, nodded in agreement, and offered advice. If you truly wish to engage in charitable work, I suggest starting with the church's charitable organizations. Most other charitable organizations have tax avoidance as their goal and won't truly invest money in charity, which I believe you wouldn't like. Only those charitable organizations with a Church of the Night background will truly practice charity, which is just right for you. Audrey tapped her chest 4 times clockwise and said softly, "Praise the goddess. Praise the goddess." Annie also tapped her chest 4 times clockwise. She was also a devout believer of the Church of the Night. And Ember, as a god-favored of the goddess, remained seated on the sofa eating snacks, not moving at all, clearly having no intention of saluting. Undoubtedly, his faith in the goddess was neither firm nor devout. "Annie," Audrey suddenly said, "I think you must be tired too, right? Do you want to go back and rest for a bit?" Annie was startled for a moment, but soon nodded gently and winked at Audrey. "Yes, miss, I am very tired now and need to go back and rest for a bit." It won't take too long, an hour will be enough." Although she wasn't tired and didn't need to rest. But she would not refuse Audrey's instructions. Of course, although a maid shouldn't inquire about her mistress's affairs, some things still need to be controlled as much as possible. Therefore, she only needed to rest for 1 hour. Annie exited the room, and Susie also sensibly left the room, closing the door behind her by backing up. But she did not leave. Instead, she squatted in the corridor, seemingly guarding the door for the 2 people inside the room. In fact, the Steam Church had arranged 2 rooms for Ember and them. One for Ember, and one for Audrey, Annie, and Susie. And the reason why Annie and Susie had to be sent away now was because today was Monday. And now, it was already 2:55 in the afternoon. Audrey couldn't go back to her own room to go to the gray fog, because then Annie would also be in the room, unless she kicked Annie out. Therefore, she could only stay in Ember's private room. Audrey lay on the bed and glanced at Ember before closing her eyes. He was already lying down on the sofa, waiting for Mr. Full summoning. Above the boundless gray fog, the magnificent palace stood quietly. Moon, Emlyn White, who had come here once again, just regained his sight and saw Miss Justice opposite him looking towards the top of the mottled long table and greeting him in a cheerful tone. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool." Justice, Audrey greeted them in order, starting from the Fool and Lover, and ending with Mr. World. This order was not based on the seating arrangement, nor was it based on the order in which they joined the Tarot Club, but rather followed the rules of the tarot cards. The Fool was the beginning that encompassed all possibilities, and Mr. World was the ending of perfect sublimation. This was a little bit of obsessive-compulsive disorder from Miss Audrey, a lover of mysticism, which appeared after the members of the Tarot Club became more numerous and organized. Audrey's mood became increasingly cheerful, her eyebrows and eyes full of smiles. She looked at the figure in the thick fog and said with a rising intonation, "Respected Mr. Fool, I've obtained 3 more pages of Russell's diary." With Miss Justice setting an example, the magician also spoke. "Mr. Fool, I also have 3 new pages of Russell's diary here." Mr. Fool nodded slightly, expressing approval, but at the same time felt a little helpless. Miss Justice and Miss Magician had already become his most reliable source of diaries, always present at every Tarot Club meeting. But this also caused the enthusiasm of other members to not be very high. Overall, it was still a good thing. Chapter 196, Rich Lady Spending Money. Of the 6 pages of the diary, 2 pages were duplicates of diaries previously submitted by others. This is unavoidable unless the members of the Tarot Club truly learn simplified Chinese, but that is impossible. 3 of the remaining 4 pages were worthless, mostly belonging to the period when Rosal lost his ideals and was obsessed with money. The entire text was filled with sentences like, "What I invented today, what I plan to invent tomorrow, how many gold coins I sold, how much investment I received, etc." Klein could barely control his expression, wanting nothing more than to slap these diary pages onto Rosal's face. "Emperor, oh Emperor, how could you fall so low? Thinking only of money all day long, how vulgar. Too vulgar. Utterly vulgar. Can't you be a little more ambitious, like me?" After severely criticizing Rosal the Great in his heart, Klein looked at the last page of the diary. November 11th, on Singles Day, I finally persuaded the Eternal Blazing Sun Church to let me enter the painting world again. It's truly amazing. Every time I enter the painting world, it leaves me in awe. If the Eternal Blazing Sun Church hadn't told me, I would even think this was the divine kingdom of Eternal Blazing Sun. Overall, this experience was precious. Moreover, I got a piece of information from Ifu of the Eternal Blazing Sun Church. For extraordinary of other churches and other sequences, they are merely tourists coming to sightsee. Entering the painting world is just for fun, only considered a relatively novel experience. But for the believers of eternal blazing sun, this is comparable to a miracle. It's just a pity that I am not an extraordinary of the Cantor sequence. I am just the tourist she spoke of. Damn it. Why doesn't the Steam Church have its own painting world? What a pity, it's such a pity. I should have chosen the Eternal Blazing Sun Church back then. Why did I choose the Steam Church? I regret it deeply. Is it still time for me to defect now? Klein's mouth twitched. Emperor, you are not loyal. As if predicting the reader's reaction, the Emperor defended himself in the diary as if talking to himself. Loyalty. Can loyalty be eaten? But actually, joining the Eternal Blazing Sun Church is not considered betrayal. After all, the Emperor is originally the sun. If changing sequences randomly didn't lead to losing control, I would really want to get a potion of the Cantor sequence and drink it now. Pain, so much pain. Savant's sequence. Even dogs wouldn't choose it. Based on his reading of previous diaries, Klein could vaguely see how unscrupulous Rosal the Great was. Therefore, he was not too surprised by his attitude in the diary. The only thing that made him somewhat curious was what wonderful use the painting world had. Although the Emperor was unscrupulous, he wouldn't casually say things like, defecting. What kind of benefit could make him entertain the idea of betraying the Steam Church? For extraordinary of the Cantor sequence, what did that painting world truly mean? Could it be like the Blessed Lands in Shanja novels, having more abundant spiritual energy than the outside world, which can speed up cultivation? But that's not right. The advancement of extraordinary relies on the digestion of potions and acting. I haven't heard of anyone getting stronger by absorbing spiritual energy from heaven and earth. After all, this world probably doesn't have martial arts mentioned in novels. Even if it did exist, it certainly couldn't be compared with extraordinary. If that's the case, what wonderful use does such a blessed land actually have? Klein felt a bit helpless. Rosal always spoke in halves in his diary. Most things had to be filled in by imagination. Of course, it's also possible that the important content was recorded on the next page of this diary, but unfortunately, the Tarot Club members don't have complete sets of the diary at all. The submitted diary pages are almost all scattered, and it's rare to have two adjacent pages appear at the same time. Klein withdrew his thoughts, made the paper in his hand disappear, and leaned back slightly, saying, "You can begin." Hanged Man Alger glanced sideways at the Mr. Vampire and was the first to speak. "Do you still want the Blood Clan Baron's inheritance? 4,500 pounds. This is the best price I could get for you." In reality, that pirate was willing to sell it for 3,200 pounds. But for new members, Hanged Man felt he should give them some special care. In addition, since Miss Justice no longer needed the fruits of the illusionary wind chime tree, which meant he lost a source of income for nothing, he definitely had to find a way to make up for it from elsewhere. Emlyn's expression immediately became a little distorted. Although their family were all quite good apothecaries and doctors, with a decent annual income, and lived long enough that they should have accumulated considerable wealth, ever since he became obsessed with dolls, Emlyn could no longer save money, and occasionally even ordered custom-made ones. If the value of those dolls wasn't counted, his savings were less than 500 pounds. But if he had to sell those dolls, I'll think about it again. Moon, Emlyn said with difficulty. Do I want a wife, or do I want to become stronger? This is a difficult choice. Miss Justice. Hanged Man looked at Audrey again and said, the two magical items you commissioned have been completed, a mask and a ring. The mask uses faceless extraordinary characteristics. It can truly change your appearance and grants you 4 extraordinary abilities: manipulating flames, flame jumping, damage transfer, and danger intuition, enhancing your balance and agility. Its appearance is a silver-white mask, which can also be a hat or earrings. It can change its shape, and you can name it. Of course, it also has its small flaws. When you wear it, your emotions will be amplified. You must learn to control yourself, otherwise, problems can easily arise. And that ring uses Magician Extraordinary ability. It possesses almost all of Magician's extraordinary abilities. In addition to manipulating flames, flame jumping, damage transfer, and danger intuition, it also has the extraordinary abilities of paper figure substitute, bone softening, and air bullet. Hanged Man explained the abilities and side effects of the two magical items in detail, pausing for a moment before speaking slowly. The total cost for making these two magical items is 1,200 pounds. Audrey nodded lightly and asked, Mr. Hanged Man, including the 200 pounds reward, I will give you a total of 1,400 pounds, is that all right? Yes. Hanged Man nodded gently, without the slightest doubt about Miss Justice's credibility. In fact, since he was an acquaintance, he could get a friendly price from the craftsman. So the actual cost of production for the craftsman was only £800, which means he could net £600 from it. As for the extraordinary characteristics required for production, they were all provided by Mr. World, and Miss Justice paid a total of £6,000 for them. The magical item made from faceless extraordinary characteristics was something Audrey needed herself. As for the magician extraordinary characteristics, it was prepared for Hilbert. This extraordinary characteristics was originally intended for Hilbert's advancement, but given Hilbert's digestion progress, it would take him at least half a year or more to advance to Sequence 7 Magician. Instead of leaving it in the warehouse for a full half a year, it was better to directly make it into a magical item and give it to Hilbert to use. As for the extraordinary characteristics needed for advancement, it could be collected separately within this half a year. If push came to shove, Ember could also be asked for help to restore this magical item back into extraordinary characteristics. Hanged Man then continued. In addition, I have contacted some sellers who are willing to sell the extraordinary characteristics and extraordinary materials they possess. The total value is approximately £20,000. Audrey immediately understood and smiled faintly. Mr. Hanged Man, I will transfer 22,000 gold pounds to you through Mr. Fool after the gathering. But please ensure that these extraordinary materials are not overpriced. I believe with Mr. Hanged Man's extensive experience, you can achieve this. Okay. Hanged Man nodded without hesitation and said, my demand is very large, so they will mostly give me the best price, usually dealing at the lowest price. Although he himself liked to overprice to earn the difference, he did not hesitate at all regarding Miss Justice's request. Being overpriced by others is impossible, never in this lifetime. It has always been his turn to overprice others, how could it be anyone else's turn to overprice him? As for whether he himself would take the opportunity to earn a middleman's difference, for other matters, such as the production of magical items, he would definitely earn a difference. But for a major client like Miss Justice, to ensure sustainable development, Hanged Man was not prepared to overprice too severely. For example, a Sequence 8 extraordinary characteristics is normally only £600. Even if he overprices, it won't exceed £630. After all, once the price is too high and makes Miss Justice dissatisfied, she will no longer entrust him with such good opportunities, which cuts off his own source of wealth. In addition, this will also leave an impression of greed in the eyes of the other Tarot Club members. Once he is labeled, he is bound to be isolated by other members. This is undoubtedly unacceptable for Hanged Man. He would not give up his status and future in the Tarot Club for a little bit of petty gain. What's more, he said this batch of materials was worth 20,000 gold pounds, but Miss Justice said she would give 22,000 pounds. That 2,000 pounds is undoubtedly his reward. This is different from the originally agreed 5%, this is 10% of the total value. It is clear that Miss Justice is proactively increasing the reward. This is very consistent with Miss Justice's character, not short of money. The last time she only gave a 5% reward was probably because the other party's actions had not originally received the family's permission and promise, so she didn't dare to give too high a reward. This time, the proactive increase in price clearly indicates that she has received strong support from her family and does not need to worry about money matters. Miss Justice. With Hanged Man's example, Furs also spoke, I have a batch of low sequence extraordinary materials and extraordinary characteristics from the apprentice sequence, with a total value of around £10,000. Justice also quickly replied, I will transfer £11,000 to you through Mr. Fool, is that alright? Yes. Furs nodded lightly, having no objection to this. Little Sun also followed sincerely. Miss Justice, I have compiled a list of monsters in the area near Silver City. You can see if there is anything you need in it. He's truly a practical child. Almost all the members of the Tarot Club had this thought at the same time. Even though she had joined the Tarot Club for so long, Audrey felt she had grown a lot. Only Mr. the Sun still maintained a naive disposition. One should know that this list itself was worth a considerable amount, yet he just gave it away for free. More importantly, the Silver City area where the Sun is located is in the land abandoned by God, where these gold pounds are completely useless. Seeing that the time was almost right, Klein controlled Mr. World and said hoarsely, Lover, have you found anything from the underground ruins I commissioned you to explore? Underground ruins. The eyes of the other Tarot Club members were instantly drawn over, each one incredibly curious. An underground ruin that could make Lover personally explore it must be very important. What kind of secrets were hidden within? Ember shook his head and said, When I arrived at the underground ruins last night, the evil spirit you mentioned had already escaped. Someone was helping him in the dark. Last night. Audrey blinked. Wasn't Ember with her last night? They were clearly having dinner together at her luxurious villa. Did he use teleportation to leave midway? Having teleportation is really convenient. As expected. Klein frowned slightly, but he was not too surprised by the turn of events. Someone interfered with his memory of the underground ruins, definitely wanting to do something to it while they had the chance. Even though he reacted in time, the other party had clearly achieved their goal. The evil spirit's escape might just be the beginning. Klein withdrew his thoughts, controlled Mr. World, and said in a deep voice. I also encountered some trouble in Bansi last night. The ancient customs of Bansi Harbor revived, and some residents became cultists. Even the bishop of the Storm Church had fallen. The punishers, priests, and servants of the Storm Church and the local church were all skinned by the bishop. In a certain evil ritual, their bodies and heads were turned into undead monsters, and their skin was sewn into a human skin robe. The bishop seemed to be a member of the Skin Taker Messenger. And the bishop himself gained great benefits from this ritual. Although he was originally only at sequence 6, his strength was comparable to sequence 5. Although the matter has been resolved, it caused considerable casualties. Lover, do you have any leads? Mr. World was on Bansi Island. The evil ritual of skinning. Audrey felt a chill. The word, skinning, alone made her uncomfortable, let alone an evil cult ritual. And this Skin Taker Messenger was undoubtedly the evil organization that caused the bishop's downfall. Just hearing it gave people an uncomfortable feeling. Chapter 197, Terrifying. Why ask the lover? While feeling uncomfortable with the evil, skinning, ritual, a question was also deeply rooted in Audrey's heart. She subconsciously looked at the figure across the table, hoping to get the answer from Ember's mouth. At this time, Mr. World, with the help of Mr. Fool, had materialized the appearance of Bishop Miller that he had encountered. Seeing the round bishop wearing a human skin robe, Ember pondered for a moment and slowly said. The Skin Taker Messengers usually develop followers in remote mountain villages, and every once in a while, they hold grand festivals. During the festivals, the chosen, dancers, will skin all the villagers, whether they are men or themselves. The high-quality hides that are peeled off will be used as offerings to the Skin Taker Messengers. The skinned men will be thrown into a fire, and the dancers will dance ecstatically during the festival to please the Skin Taker Messengers. And these skinned villagers will be given some twisted but powerful abilities before they die. That bishop might have obtained similar power through the ritual, but as far as I know, the Skin Taker Messenger's ritual does not include decapitation and flesh sacrifice. Furs felt a little creeped out. Even without counting the decapitation and flesh sacrifice, just the skinning itself was terrifying enough. Even just listening to Ember's narration, she felt her scalp tingle. Why would there be such a cruel cult organization? Isn't Bansi Island the territory of the Storm Church? How did they manage to let a cult grow and expand in their territory, and even lure a bishop of the Storm Church to fall? Audrey inexplicably thought of a phrase. A hide factory. Those Skin Taker Messengers treated the villages they ruled as hide factories, and the ruled villagers were the raw materials for the hides. Just imagining the cruel methods of the sacrifice ritual and the tragic state of those who were skinned, Audrey already felt extremely uncomfortable. Although she had been exposed to a lot of information about the extraordinary world and had even personally experienced the Backland Great Smog incident that nearly caused hundreds of thousands of deaths. But this kind of barbaric, backward, and bloodthirsty sacrifice ritual still exceeded her understanding. The hanged man, Alger, pondered for a moment and also frowned, analyzing. The ritual of skinning and sacrificing flesh may be related to local customs. The natives of Bansi Island have a tradition of live sacrifice. They once believed in an evil spirit called the God of Weather. Of course, from the current perspective, they might still be believing in this evil spirit. Overseas, on the South Continent, there are many similar evil spirits that appear to have been eliminated but are actually still alive in strange states. Many people die violently in those places, not necessarily due to illness. If you have similar travel or adventure plans, don't be careless. The hanged man paused, then asked in confusion. It's just that I've never heard of the Skin Taker Messenger organization. Mr. World chuckled softly and said, that's what I thought too. That bishop might be simultaneously believing in the evil spirits worshipped by two cults and creatively combining the sacrifice rituals of these two cults. The expressions of Audrey and the others became a bit subtle. Simultaneously believing in two different existences. This description seemed quite fitting for them as well. After all, they each had their own gods they believed in. Audrey and Zio believed in the goddess of the night, while the hanged man was a follower of the Lord of Storms. Emlyn believed in the blood ancestor, Lilith. Furs was a follower of the Lord of Steam, and even Little Sun also believed in the Creator. In a sense, they all fit the description of simultaneously believing in two different existences. No, it's different. At least the two gods I believe in are not evil gods, unlike those degenerates who believe in two evil spirits and perform cruel sacrifice rituals. Audrey comforted herself inwardly. The hanged man, Alger, frowned tightly, completely unable to understand what was happening on Bansi Island. As a pirate's captain, he also frequently visited Bansi Island, a genuine visit, not a plunder. He mainly went there for supplies, and as an official pirate, he occasionally contacted the church on the island. For example, Bishop Miller, who was 3 meters tall and wore a human skin robe in the scene materialized by Mr. World, Alger was also acquainted with him. But he had never discovered any signs of Bishop Miller betraying the church and joining a cult. It was no exaggeration to say that Alger felt Bishop Miller's faith in the Lord of Storms was much firmer than his own. Why would such a person suddenly join a cult? Moreover, why specifically Bansi Harbor? Bansi Harbor hadn't had any problems for hundreds of years, so why would there be traces of those cults at this time? What kind of connection lies behind this? Alger tried to describe the events in Bansi Harbor as a chance occurrence, an accident within the realm of understanding. Suddenly, he heard a slightly low chuckle. This laughter came from the very top of the mottled long table. Mr. Fool. The hanged man suddenly turned his head. Mr. Fool. The matter in Bansi Harbor is not as simple as it appears. Justice, Audrey, immediately looked towards Mr. Fool sitting on the high-backed chair. Seeing the gazes of confusion, curiosity, or excitement directed at him, Klein smiled leisurely, with a touch of reminiscence in his tone. This reminds me of an angel king. Medici, who founded Redemption Rose. His bloodline descendants live in Bansi. Redemption Rose. An angel king related to the true creator. Audrey didn't expect things to get more serious layer by layer and subconsciously asked in confusion. Bansi. That's the ancient name for Bansi, the hanged man, Alger, responded in a low voice, clenching his hands. That's about right. Mr. Fool, Klein, saw that he had successfully piqued the interest of the others and muttered softly to himself. He didn't plan to continue speaking. Firstly, stopping at a hint was more in line with Mr. Fool's persona. Secondly, he didn't actually know any more information, saying more would lead to more mistakes, so it was better not to say anything. Although Klein extremely disliked riddle people like Rosal the Great, he himself didn't mind being a riddle person occasionally. The feeling was actually quite good. Furs asked with some hesitation. Then, does that mean that the god of weather is likely Medici? Bansi Island is the secluded residence of Medici's descendants, and the people here happen to believe in a god of weather. It's hard not to connect the two. Not just Furs, but most members of the Tarot Club had this speculation. Ember pondered for a moment and gently shook his head. It's unlikely. Medici died a long time ago. Even if he survived until now in the form of a malevolent spirit, he has only recently escaped confinement. It's impossible for him to be related to the god of weather who existed hundreds of years ago. Died. The Tarot Club immediately fell silent, everyone's face filled with astonishment. An angel king above sequence 1, just died like that. Almost everyone subconsciously looked at the top seat, trying to see Mr. Fool's reaction. However, what they didn't know was that Mr. Fool was even more shocked than them. Medici died, and turned into a malevolent spirit. That is to say, the malevolent spirit I encountered in the underground ruins was Medici. A huge wave surged in Klein's heart. Working backward from the answer to find the process, he almost immediately confirmed Ember's statement. That malevolent spirit died over 1,000 years ago and had been trapped in the underground ruins for these 1,000 years, unable to escape. But he had a blasphemy card made by Rosal the Great over 100 years ago. Excluding the possibility that the malevolent spirit specifically went out to retrieve this blasphemy card, there is only one answer left. Someone brought this blasphemy card to that underground ruin. And why would someone do that? Isn't this the influence of the law of extraordinary characteristics aggregation? The greater the mass, the stronger the pull. Apart from true God, the being with the greatest mass in this world is none other than sequence 1. And as an angel king of sequence 1, it is very reasonable for him to attract a red priest card. And those extraordinary who died in the underground ruins were undoubtedly attracted there under the effect of this aggregation. No, that's not right. Since Medici is already dead, the being who killed Medici must have taken his share of the sequence 1 extraordinary characteristics. That is to say, the current Medici at most only has the status of sequence 2. Of course, even so, he has enough mass to attract those middle and low sequence extraordinary to go there. And it is precisely because the other party is Medici himself that he is so familiar with the secrets related to Medici and Redemption Rose. To conceal his inner shock and to resolve his doubts, Klein controlled Mr. World to ask hoarsely. Mr. Lover, are you saying that the malevolent spirit in the underground ruins is Medici himself? Ember said frankly. Just a guess, but it's highly possible. Someone should have held a ritual of becoming a god in that underground ruin before, and this ritual requires 3 sequence 1 extraordinary characteristics. So, the ancestors of the Medici family, the Sorin family, and the Einhorn family all became sacrifices for this ritual. Their sequence 1 extraordinary characteristics were formulated into potions and consumed by the user during the ritual of becoming a god. And their souls were left in the underground ruin and became malevolent spirits. Originally, there should have been 3 malevolent spirits. But they might have fought and killed each other, and in the end, only Medici's malevolent spirit survived. So the seal that imprisoned the malevolent spirit in the underground ruin needed the bloodline of the descendants of these 3 families to be unsealed. Klein immediately recalled the conditions and demands of that malevolent spirit. His reason told him that Ember's guess was very likely the truth. But this truth not only failed to resolve his confusion but made him feel even more incredible. If someone really killed Medici and the other 2 angels of the Red Priest pathway at sequence 1, then who did it? If the other party really consumed the potion and successfully completed the ritual, then the other party should have become a Red Priest at sequence 0, becoming a true god. If so, why are there now 7 gods instead of 8? Unless the other party's ritual of becoming a god was destroyed, or they were killed when they consumed the potion, as well as the conjecture that Klein felt was the least likely but kept lingering in his mind. The other party has already become a god, but ultimately ended up falling. If it really involved the fall of a god, it must have left a significant mark in history. As a history student, Klein immediately began searching the information in his mind and almost instantly found the corresponding match. Tudor dynasty. That underground ruin had the emblem of the Tudor dynasty, which proved that it was a ruin belonging to the Tudor dynasty. And the ruler of the Tudor dynasty was the Blood Emperor. Could it be that the Blood Emperor plotted to kill 3 extraordinary of the Red Priest pathway at sequence 1, thereby consuming the potion made from their sequence 1 extraordinary characteristics, and became a true god at sequence 0? Even though it was just a conjecture, the more Klein thought about it, the more likely this possibility seemed. The 4 Emperors' War left a significant mark in history, and if the Blood Emperor was a true god, would the other 3 emperors also be true gods? According to Rosal the Great's diary, he learned some details of the 4 Emperors' War from Mr. Dorr. For example, the 4 emperors were the true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection in the Solomon Empire, the half-mad Blood Emperor of the Tudor dynasty, the Night Emperor of the Trenasost Empire, and the Nether Sovereign of the South Continent, commonly known as Death. Another example is that in the 4 Emperors' War, the Black Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor fell one after another, and the Nether Sovereign gained the greatest benefit. Mr. Azuk's reply also had similar records. I looked up at them and was glanced at by the Blood Emperor, and then I lost consciousness. I should have participated in that 4 Emperors' War to some extent, but the specific details still need to be recalled. Perhaps it was the trauma of that encounter that made me lose my memory again and again, die repeatedly, and wake up again and again. Even though Mr. Azuk was severely injured, he was still able to make Ins Zangwil, who had already advanced to sequence 4 and held 008, helpless. He was very likely an angel at sequence 2. Only a true god could cause an angel to be severely injured with just a glance. The Blood Emperor was a true god. The other 3 in the 4 Emperors' War could be compared with him, so it's impossible that they weren't true gods. The Nether Sovereign, or Death, is very likely a true god at sequence 0. The Black Emperor himself corresponds to the sequence 0 of the Black Emperor pathway. He is also a true god, which makes perfect sense. And if the remaining Night Emperor was not a true god, how could he have received the full assistance of the Blood Clan in the 4 Emperors' War? One must know that the Blood Clan are a proud bunch. After all, their ancestor was Lilith, one of the former 8 ancient gods. Only a true god could make them willingly submit. And in the notes of the Abraham family, some details were also recorded in detail. That is, true god personally participated in this 4 gods' war. And if the 4 Emperors' War was a war between true god, it would perfectly match. Only battles between true god could make true god personally participate. Moreover, many details can also be confirmed from Mr. Azuk's reply. For example, the true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection, and the half-mad Blood Emperor. Mr. Azuk is not someone who uses words imprecisely. Even though his memory is incomplete now, he would not make mistakes in describing such matters. The phrase, true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection, already explained everything. This is a true Black Emperor, a true god at sequence 0. But why did Mr. Isaac describe the Blood Emperor as, almost without reason, on the verge of losing control? Chapter 198, Visionary Matryoshka Doll. Klein recalled Mr. Azuk's reply and pondered how to subtly reveal this information. His first thought was to have Mr. Fool continue to recall, but this would seem too abrupt. Therefore, the only solution was for Mr. World to speak. With this thought, Klein immediately controlled Mr. World and said in a deep voice, "I know an elder who personally experienced the Four Emperors' War in the Fourth Epic. He told me that he once saw the Blood Emperor. He was as tall as a mountain, wearing a scarlet cloak. However, his eyes were unusually crazed, almost devoid of reason, on the verge of losing control. There was also the true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection. He sat on a massive throne, looking down on everything on the earth." Klein, speaking through Mr. World, recounted Mr. Azuk's reply word for word from a bystander's perspective. However, the members of the Tarot Club had different focuses on these words. Elder. An elder, who personally experienced the Four Emperors' War and even lived until now. That's at least a demigod. The Moon Emlyn White looked at Mr. World with some shock. Among so many people in the Tarot Club, he had always felt that Mr. World and lovers were the most mysterious, and now this idea was even more firmly established. After all, that was a demigod who had lived for over 1,000 years, conservatively estimated to be from a family with 1,000 years of heritage, as ancient as the existing royal family of various kingdoms. While such a force was not as powerful as the Blood Clan, it was still considered one of the elites among humans. Unlike the Moon, although the Hanged Man was equally shocked that Mr. World had a demigod elder, he was clearer about one thing than the Moon. Among so many people in the Tarot Club, Mr. World was the only one who appeared as a dependent of Mr. Fool. And the elder mentioned by Mr. World was very likely a demigod, or even an angel, under Mr. Fool. As a dependent of the Fool, it was perfectly normal for Mr. World to obtain some secret information that ordinary people could not know from the demigods or angels under Mr. Fool. But why did Mr. World suddenly mention it? This kind of information shouldn't have been revealed to them. Wait. Alger's heart suddenly tightened, and he re-examined the situation. This topic originated with Mr. World. It was he who guided Ember to that underground ruin, and it was he who brought up the matter of Bansi Island. The god of weather, skin-taker messenger, Medici, so many forces are entangled on the same small island. This cannot be explained by simple coincidence. And the appearance of one powerful being after another makes things even more confusing. The changes happening on Bansi Island are as if someone is deliberately stirring up trouble. And now, a dependent of Mr. Fool has also appeared on Bansi Island and is guiding them by suddenly revealing information. All of this conveys one signal. Mr. Fool had foresight. He hopes to spread this matter through us. Alger's pupils contracted, and he lowered his gaze in fear. Why does Mr. Fool want to spread these matters? No, it's not necessarily that he wants to spread everything. There should only be a part of it that needs to be spread. As for other hidden information, perhaps it is compensation for them spreading the word. The true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection. Audrey muttered the phrase in her heart and suddenly looked up at lovers opposite her. Didn't George III attempt to become the true Black Emperor? Even if his plan was thwarted, George III was only one step away from Sequence 0 at that time. And does the true Black Emperor who returned from resurrection of the Solomon Empire mean that the other party once reached the Sequence 0 level? The Black Emperor is Sequence 0, and the Blood Emperor is suspected of having performed a god ascension ritual, likely a true god. Does that mean the Four Emperors' War that erupted at the end of the Fourth Epic was actually a war of true gods? However, this war ultimately ended with the fall of the Four Emperors. There were no true victors among them. And the empires they established also disintegrated, and their bloodline descendants are almost extinct. Half-mad. Ember lingered on the phrase, half-mad Blood Emperor, for a long time, seemingly enlightened. Klein silently observed the reactions of the others, his gaze briefly resting on Ember before quickly moving away. At the same time, Mr. Fool lightly tapped the surface of the mottled long table and said leisurely, "This gathering ends here." As the voice faded, figures disappeared from the palace, and the gray fog above returned to its eternal silence. Coincidence, another coincidence. Klein pressed his right thumb and middle finger on his temples and rubbed them slightly with force. Since setting sail, he had vaguely felt that something was wrong. First, he inexplicably forgot about the underground ruin, and then near the coast of Demir Island, he encountered a pirate group that shouldn't have been there. One must know that the waters near Demir Island are patrolled by the kingdom's navy all year round. And even the Seven Sea Generals regard this place as a forbidden zone, not entering this sea area unless absolutely necessary. So how could an ordinary pirate group dare to appear here? But it was precisely because of this pirate group's abnormal behavior that the captain of the White Agate, Alant, became suspicious and decided to report this matter to the Navy and the Church. However, there was no radio equipment on board, so they could only return to Demir Island or stop at the nearest Bansi Island to send a message to the Navy through the telegraph office there. The White Agate thus changed its itinerary. Originally scheduled to depart from Demir Island and arrive at Tiana Island in 3 days, they arrived at Bansi Island on the evening of the second day and immediately encountered a series of tense and exciting accidents. On the surface, everything seemed reasonable. But Klein, who had the sequelae of 008, already had some PTSD about coincidence, so he could clearly realize the massive amount of coincidence that existed in this series of events that were happening. A pirate group whose captain's bounty was only 900 pounds, coincidentally, appeared in the waters near Demir Island, and, coincidentally, was forced to give up raiding because Danitz, a pirate with a bounty of 3,000 pounds, was on board. And all of this, coincidentally, prompted the White Agate to go to Bansi, where it encountered a series of accidents on Bansi Island. And it was on Bansi Island that Klein also accidentally learned from Danitz that the ancient name of Bansi was Bensi, and then connected Bensi to Medici, and further to that underground ruin. And thus he was alerted to the fact that his memory had been tampered with, someone had changed his memory, making him subconsciously blur the existence of that underground ruin. But what if Danitz's actions were also a coincidence? He, coincidentally, wanted to show off his knowledge in front of German Sparrow, and, coincidentally, when talking about the legend of Bansi Island, he accidentally let slip that the ancient name of Bansi was Bensi. Thus, Klein also, coincidentally, realized that his memory had been tampered with. If all of this is a coincidence, then is his realization of this series of coincidences also based on coincidence? Does this mean that he is still in the story carefully woven by that mastermind? Even his realization of all this, followed by the transmission of information to Ember, is a part of the coincidence. That's why Ember found nothing when he went to the underground ruin, because the other party had already achieved their goal, and even sending Ember to the underground ruin itself was the other party's goal, so they needed to use his hand to accomplish all of this. But how is this possible? He was able to do all of this entirely relying on the special nature of the gray fog above. And Klein had tried, even true gods would find it difficult to invade this space. This was the conclusion Klein reached based on his personal experience of being invaded by the two sequence zero true gods, the eternal blazing sun and the goddess of the night. No matter how powerful the person who fabricated all these stories is, it is impossible to include the gray fog above in the story. This is Klein's confidence, and also his pride. And it was precisely based on this pride that Klein mistakenly thought that his realization of the coincidence was due to the gray fog above. But the reason he entered the gray fog above was because he had already realized something was wrong when he heard the word Bensi. Klein's pride made him overlook this detail, and without thinking, he was ready to report it to Ember. Klein, who had come back to his senses, had realized the crux of the matter, which was why he stayed here to sort out his thoughts. My contact with Ember is realized based on the gray fog above, but the other party cannot affect the gray fog above, otherwise my actions on the gray fog above would definitely be subject to strict control. But the other party must have guessed that I have a method of rapid contact with Ember, which is not an uncommon ability. After all, not only Mr. Azik has a messenger, even Miss Daly, who was only sequence 6 at that time, could summon a messenger. Our contact does not necessarily need to be through the gray fog above, we can also use a messenger. After sorting out all these thoughts, Klein finally let out a long breath. Even if his experience at sea was truly manipulated by someone, this did not extinguish his determination to find the mermaid. He did not have the Chunabu ambition of, I want this sky to no longer cover my eyes, but he also could not tolerate his life being manipulated at will. If the experiences along the way were all coincidences, then the person who created these coincidences is undoubtedly stronger than in Zangwil, and has a more excellent ability to weave stories, making it difficult for people to detect the incongruity. Klein didn't know to what extent he needed to grow to avoid being manipulated by the other party, but it was definitely better to be stronger. And finding the mermaid, and advancing to marionettist, was his first step to becoming stronger. Along the way, I may encounter more coincidences and changes, and I may not be able to smoothly find the mermaid. But not necessarily, after all, in the eyes of that mastermind, I should just be an indispensable chess piece, since he has been targeting Ember all along. If I, who is kept in the dark, am the first layer, then I, who heard Bensi, and realized the coincidence, am in the second layer. And now, I, who realize that all of this may be a coincidence, should be in the third layer, and should have slightly jumped out of the storyline woven by the other party. What's more, this is the gray fog above, and the decisions I make are based on my own thoughts, unrelated to coincidence. Now that his goal has been achieved, the possibility of him continuing to weave coincidences, for me, is unlikely. His attention should be focused on Ember. Klein rubbed his temples, and he had also revealed all the information he knew, hoping that this information would be helpful to Ember. It should be, after all, since the mastermind chose to use the underground ruin as part of his plan. It means that the other party is definitely related to the existence of the underground ruin, at least to the Blood Emperor, and the 3 Sequence 1 angels who were sacrificed. If this is the case, then there is hope of finding clues related to the mastermind, from some subtle signs. Although Klein still didn't know the other party's purpose, at least he had done what he should do. At this moment, Klein's ears suddenly heard layers of illusory prayers. Clang, clang, clang. The steam train, spewing thick smoke, sped along the tracks, heading towards the west of the continent. In a luxurious compartment of a carriage, the girl lying on the bed slowly opened her eyes. She almost subconsciously looked at the sofa in the room. Ember, who was originally lying there, also slowly stood up and walked to the window, staring intently at the scenery outside. Audrey organized her words and said softly, "Ember, can you understand the meaning of Mr. World's words?" Ember withdrew his gaze from the trees flashing past outside the window and said softly, "He is reminding me." Reminding. Audrey blinked. When she heard Mr. World's words, all she could think about was things like gods, war. The reason she asked was to confirm whether Ember also believed that the Black Emperor and the Blood Emperor had both advanced to the true god of Sequence 0. After all, Ember, who had explored that underground ruin, should have discovered more information. But now it seems she was somewhat out of sync with Ember. What was Mr. World trying to remind him of with those words? I didn't hear anything. Audrey lowered her head silently and muttered softly in her heart. She knew that she must have missed some crucial information, which prevented her from connecting everything. It's just, why couldn't Mr. World be clearer? Even if he couldn't be too clear due to some concerns, they could completely wait until others left and then apply to Mr. Fool for a private conversation. It can't be because he only knows that little information, right? As soon as this thought popped into Audrey's mind, her thinking suddenly froze, somewhat disbelieving. It can't be true, can it? But isn't Mr. World a dependent of Mr. Fool? Chapter 199. Blind Man, you found the point. Woo. The steam train engine, puffing out large amounts of smoke, pulled carriage after carriage into the platform, slowing down more and more. On January 11th, the steam special train that Ember was taking finally arrived at Constant City, the capital of Janai County. The straight-line distance between Backland and Constant City exceeds 1,100 kilometers, and the actual mileage of the laid railway is much higher than this. After all, it is impossible for the entire journey to be flat or go in a straight line. The railway company has to consider economic interests and will pass through as many cities as possible when laying tracks, which inevitably involves detours. Although the steam special train that Ember and the others took did not need to stop in other cities along the line, it still took more than a day to reach Constant City. The young girl wearing a pure white long dress inlaid with gold lace followed Ember out of the carriage. Her golden hair was casually tied up, falling down smoothly and brightly. Her emerald green eyes reflected a bright luster, both deep like the sea and like the purest gem. The girl's facial features and face shape combined to create a breathtaking beauty, with an elegant and pure temperament. Is this Constant? Audrey looked around at the surrounding environment, her eyes sparkling with light. Ember scanned left and right, and suddenly asked, "There seems to be no one here." The platform in Constant City looked spacious and bright, but there was not a single person there, which was a bit too empty. It was hard not to suspect that something unexpected had happened here. Annie, the personal maid who was carrying luggage and following by Audrey's side, explained softly. "Mr. Ash, this is the platform prepared for the special train. It's normal for there to be no one here. Ordinary people are at other platforms." Ember nodded silently, slightly dispelling the doubts in his heart. This was a platform specially built for special trains. In a world ruled by nobles and extraordinary, this kind of thing was not uncommon, as rulers always enjoyed many privileges. Susie, the large golden retriever, was curiously looking around. Everything in this city made Susie feel incredibly novel. Compared to Audrey, Susie didn't need to hide her feelings as much, wagging her tail from side to side, showing her owner's joy and excitement. Executor Ekins Bernard led a team of Mechanical Heart members to their side and greeted them with a smile. "Good morning, Viscount Black, Miss Hall." Executor Ekins, good morning. Audrey nodded slightly with reserve, politely replying. Executor Eakins explained. The special train will stop at the platform for maintenance and replenishment, and will depart tomorrow morning. Before that, you can have a good day playing in Constant City. Of course, we have already booked rooms at the Azure Sea Hotel, and you can also go there to rest first. After a pause, Executor Eakins smiled and said, but I think you probably don't want to listen to me rambling here. The exit is this way. Executor Eakins pointed in a direction, and from that direction, a group of people also happened to be coming towards them. One side was mainly young people, who looked quite energetic. From their clothing and appearance, it was clear that they were Executor Eakins's colleagues in Constant City, members of the mechanical heart of the Steam Church. Leading them was a man of similar age to Executor Eakins, with a broad forehead, serious brown eyes, and wearing gold-rimmed glasses. He looked refined and gentle, yet with a certain indescribable strictness. On the other side, most of the people were dressed like servants, both male and female. Leading them was a meticulously dressed middle-aged gentleman, with a crisp white shirt, a thick gray-blue vest that perfectly covered his stomach, and a long tailcoat with clear lines and no flaws. This gentleman wore polished leather shoes and white knitted gloves. A few silver hairs were mixed in his temples, and his facial nasolabial folds were deep. His light brown eyes also appeared extremely serious. Perhaps because he lived by the sea, his skin color was very dark, but it looked healthy. Bruce, long time no see. Executor Eakins smiled and greeted the leading man, while also taking the initiative to extend his hand. The man called Bruce hesitated for a second before extending his hand to shake Executor Eakins's, but quickly retracted it as if he had been electrocuted. Executor Eakins's face darkened. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid I'll eat you? Bruce saw that Executor Eakins's expression was a little off and quickly changed the subject. Executor Eakins, everything is ready, don't waste time, come with me. Executor Eakins's expression softened slightly, but he still shook his head and explained. Wait a moment, you arrange for someone to take them to the hotel first. He turned his head to look at Ember, the three people and one dog, seemingly wanting to invite them to go together. Then he saw the middle-aged gentleman, who had already successfully connected with Ember and the others. Viscount Black, Miss Hall. The middle-aged gentleman took off his hat and pressed it to his chest, bowing in the most standard posture. My name is Derek Woolley, and I am the butler of all the mansions and villas of the Hall family in Constant. Undoubtedly, this middle-aged gentleman with a large group of servants was a butler, who had come to welcome Ember and the others. Executor Eakins's expression froze, and Bruce's faint voice immediately came from beside him. I know that lady, the most dazzling gem in Backland. She is the daughter of Earl Hall, the second largest shareholder of the Constant Coal and Steel Consortium. And in the city of Constant, the words of the Coal and Steel Consortium are more effective than the king's. I think you don't need to worry about it. Audrey smiled faintly. Executor Eakins, you can go ahead first, no need to wait for us. All right. Executor Eakins sighed, saying helplessly, I was being presumptuous. Then, goodbye, Viscount Black, Miss Hall. See you tomorrow, Executor Eakins, Mr. Bruce. The two sides said goodbye to each other, each forming two groups of people, walking towards the exit one after another. As soon as they left the station, Executor Eakins and the others took a carriage and left directly. They clearly had a specific purpose for coming to this city. On the other side, Ember and the others had arrived at the luxurious carriage with the Hall family crest parked by the roadside. Audrey reservedly offered her right hand, covered with light-colored thin gauze gloves, to Ember, allowing him to hold her hand as she got into the carriage. At the same time, she gently pressed the veil hat inlaid with blue ribbons and silk flowers with her other hand to prevent it from being blown away by the wind, because it was close to the Intersea, the wind here was always strong. The old butler stepped forward respectfully and personally opened the carriage door for them. Her shoes, inlaid with ribbon roses, stepped on the thick brown-yellow carpet. The girl's gaze swept over the wooden cabinet containing red wine, white wine, champagne, rum, and brandy, and the crystal glasses, and she sat down by the window. Due to work, Earl Hall, the second largest shareholder of the Constant Coal and Steel Consortium, also often needed to come to Constant for business. This carriage was clearly prepared to meet Earl Hall's needs, making it convenient for him to have a drink or two on the road. Ember also got into the carriage right after, sitting opposite Audrey, while Annie sat beside Audrey. Susie looked around when she got in the car, and then silently squatted at Ember's feet. Woolley got in the car and asked, Viscount Black, Miss Hall, are we going to the villa or the manor? Ember said casually, let's go to the nearest one. Audrey nodded slightly, echoing, I also think closer is better, it's more convenient. Okay. Wooly replied respectfully and gave instructions to the coachman outside. With the sound of the reins whipping, the carriage slowly drove through the street. Audrey looked at the scenes flashing by outside the window and already had a certain impression of this city. And it was only then that Audrey finally saw the true appearance of this city and realized its difference from Backland. There were chimneys and blast furnaces everywhere, like an artificial steel forest, which was extremely visually impactful. Although the factory area in Backland also had many factories, they were completely insignificant compared to Constant. Constant, as the second largest city in the Ruined Kingdom, represented industry more than Backland, the capital. The buildings here widely used concrete and steel bars, built higher, larger, and more densely than similar buildings in Backland. And perhaps because of the rich mines here, many places here were covered with coal dust, including human bodies, but the air quality was actually better than in Backland, because the intersea wind was strong. The carriage traveled through the steel and concrete jungle of the city, driving through street after street, and finally entered the Lake Forest district. Like the Queen's district in Backland, Constant also had its own noble district, which was the Lake Forest district. It was close to the intersea, but in a completely different direction from the port and factory areas, and it luxuriously enjoyed large areas of green parks, and even forests and artificial lakes in the city. When the carriage wound around the artificial lake on the tree-covered forest paths, it was as if it had suddenly entered a primeval dense forest from a steel jungle, surrounded by vibrant life and the atmosphere of thriving growth. After more than half an hour, the carriage finally reached its destination, a luxurious villa located by the sea. In terms of area, it was even larger than the Hall family's luxurious villa in the Queen's district, and could even be called a small manor. Entering the villa, Audrey suddenly asked, "Mr. Wooly, is there a Church of the Night here?" Wooly explained, "Yes, there is a Church of the Night in the Lake Forest district. But in Constant, followers of the Church of the Night are indeed relatively few." Audrey nodded thoughtfully. The environments she had been in before were mostly populated by followers of the Church of the Night. This was because both Backland and East Chester County were traditional missionary areas of the Church of the Night. Even in Backland, where the royal family worshipped the Lord of Storms, a large portion of the population were still followers of the Goddess of the Night, because most of the nobles and commoners were followers of the Goddess of the Night. And East Chester County was located in the northeast of the Ruined Kingdom, adjacent to Winter County, where almost all the people were followers of the Night. In contrast, coastal cities mostly worshipped the Lord of Storms. For example, overseas colonies were almost entirely churches of the Storm Church, and the Church of the Night only had churches on a few islands of significant importance, such as Dinos Island. Similarly, in large industrial cities and the factory areas of other cities, workers mostly worshipped the Steam Church. And as a coastal industrial city, the difficulty of missionary work for the Steam Church and the Storm Church in Constant was significantly lower than that of the Church of the Night. Ember said thoughtfully, "This may also be related to the Ruined Kingdom's strategic layout." Audrey blinked and asked curiously, "Why do you say that?" Ember glanced at Audrey and asked, "Among the 4 major kingdoms in the North Continent, who is the Ruined Kingdom's biggest enemy?" "The Fosak Empire." Audrey replied without hesitation. The 4 kingdoms of the North Continent were all established at the end of the 4th epoch and the beginning of the 5th epoch, and all 4 kingdoms have continued to this day. In the past 1,000 years, the Ruined Kingdom has had friction with various countries, but it has only been limited to friction. The only country with which the Ruined Kingdom has had multiple full-scale wars is the Fosak Empire. At the end of the 4th epoch, the Ruined Kingdom suffered a crushing defeat in the 20 Years' War, ceding Sunia Island and a large area of land north of the Amanda Mountains to the Fosak Empire. The headquarters of the Church of the Night, which was originally located in the heartland of the Ruined Kingdom, is now on the front line with the Fosak Empire. This war was undoubtedly the Ruined Kingdom's greatest humiliation, and there was no one from top to bottom in the kingdom who did not want to regain face from the Fosak. Reclaiming Sunia Island and the territory north of the Amanda Mountains is also the greatest aspiration of successive kings of the Ruined Kingdom. Yes, Ember nodded gently and explained. The Ruined Kingdom's biggest enemy is the Fosak Empire, so it must always be on guard against attacks from the Fosak. The Church of the Night is responsible for defending the northern part of the Ruined Kingdom, the Storm Church is responsible for the defense of the Sonia Sea region, and the Intersea and its coastal cities are the responsibility of the Steam Church. Once a war breaks out, the 3 great churches will launch a counterattack against the Fosak from their respective areas of responsibility. Audrey immediately understood Ember's implication. If the Fosak launched a sneak attack, the 3 great churches must do a good job of defense and be ready to launch a counterattack at any time. But on the other hand, if the Ruined Kingdom decides to declare war on the Fosak, the three great churches also need to cooperate with the ruined kingdom to launch attacks on the Fosak Empire simultaneously from the Inter-Sea, the Amanda Mountains, and the Sonia Sea. And for the three great churches, although there is suspicion of being used by the royal family in this way, it perfectly aligns with their interests. Because the three great churches need to preach in the ruined kingdom, they naturally hope that the ruined kingdom will be as strong as possible. And if the Fosak Empire can be defeated in one fell swoop, while the ruined kingdom expands its territory, the three great churches can also gain more followers. Conversely, if the ruined kingdom is destroyed by the Fosak Empire, the three great churches will lose the opportunity to preach and may even perish as a result. Audrey was stunned for a moment when she thought of this. Because she suddenly realized that if the ruined kingdom was really destroyed, the Church of the Night and the Storm Church would lose their only missionary country. But there was one church that would not perish with the ruined kingdom, the Steam Church. This was the Orthodox Church on the North Continent that could openly preach on a large scale across two countries. This meant that even if the ruined kingdom was destroyed by the Fosak Empire, the Steam Church could continue to preach in the Intis Republic. Chapter 200, Development is the Hard Truth. January 11th, afternoon, Beckland North District. On the bustling Pesfield Street, a young girl wearing a traditional knight's uniform stood in front of a church, hesitating for a long time. The young girl looked to be just over 1.5 meters tall, with a head of shoulder-length yellow hair that was rarely neatly combed. In front of the young girl was a pure black church, with a clock tower on each side, presenting a symmetrical beauty. It was St. Samuel Cathedral, the headquarters of the Church of the Night Goddess Beckland Diocese. She had been to St. Samuel Cathedral before, but this time was somewhat different. The young girl stood at the church entrance, hesitating for a long time, unable to make up her mind. Beside the young girl, a brown-haired young woman wearing a beige stand-collar long dress and with a languid temperament softly encouraged her. "Go in quickly, isn't this what you've always hoped for?" With her friend's encouragement, the young girl finally gritted her teeth and made up her mind, stepping into the church. They walked through the quiet corridor, illuminated by the high sunlight piercing through the stained glass, and arrived at the main prayer hall. It was very dim here, making one's mood involuntarily become peaceful. There weren't many people in the main prayer hall in the afternoon, so the two young women almost immediately spotted the figure sitting on the first row of benches on the left side of the main prayer hall. It was a young man with a youthful appearance and a straight back. He wore a custom-made formal suit that looked expensive at first glance and had a head of brilliant golden long hair, completely different from the young girl's slightly frizzy yellow hair due to lack of care. The young girl silently clenched her fist, took a deep breath, walked to the first row, and sat on the bench on the right side. Her friend did not follow, but sat far away on a bench in the middle, giving the young girl a gesture of encouragement. The handsome young man with brilliant golden hair turned his head to look at the young girl, suddenly took out a gold coin, tossed it up, and softly chanted. "Her name is Hugh Dilcha." Clap. The gold coin landed in his palm, heads up, which indicated affirmation. Hugh Dilcha looked at this scene with some surprise, and the handsome young man also noticed this, so he took the initiative to greet her, saying half-jokingly, "Don't mind it, Miss Dilcha, this is just a small habit of mine. Although this is our first meeting, I think Ash should have mentioned me to you, so I won't introduce myself." Hugh Dilcha responded somewhat reservedly. "Good afternoon, Lord Hibbert." Hibbert Hall saw the young girl's reservation and said with a smile, "Miss Dill, I've heard about your matter from Ash. The Hall family is willing to provide some assistance for this, to clear your father's injustice and restore the Dill family's reputation and peerage." Hugh was silent for a long time and asked, "How do you plan to provide assistance?" Hibbert was not surprised by her question and explained, "The outline of this matter has been basically investigated clearly. The former captain of the Royal Guards, Mason Dill, was framed by a conspiracy between his deputy, Viscount Stratford, who was jealous of him, and the witch sect. His Majesty George IV is very willing to clear the Dill family's name, but the relevant evidence still needs some time to be collected." Hugh remained silent. She knew very well that George III was the instigator of all this. Her father discovered George III's secret and tried to tell the three great churches, which was why he was ordered executed by the king. As for Viscount Stratford, according to Rosal the Great, he was nothing more than a fawning lackey at best. But in Hibbert's words, it was clear that Viscount Stratford was being portrayed as the mastermind, and this was used to remove George III from the picture. This point was unavoidable. No stain could be left on George III, because neither the royal family nor the nobles would allow it. Therefore, some of the crimes committed during George III's reign would all be attributed to the deception of his subordinates, but only George III, the instigator, would not be implicated. Once upon a time, when Hugh learned that the culprit was George III, she fell into confusion and even became somewhat self-destructive. Because whether it was restoring her father's reputation or taking revenge, hope was extremely slim when facing a king. And now, Viscount Stratford was dead, George III was also dead, and even her father's injustice could be cleared. Even if she couldn't expose George III, the culprit, Hugh understood that this was already the best result she could get. Without Ember's help, relying solely on her own efforts, she wouldn't even be able to achieve this much. Hibbert didn't rush her either. He turned his head to look at the altar in front, giving the young girl ample time to think. Before long, Hibbert heard a response beside his ear. "Thank you for your help, Lord Hibbert." The young girl's voice was brighter and clearer than ever before, a sense of relief and ease after completely letting go of all burdens. Hibbert smiled and nodded. "You're welcome, Miss Dill." After a pause, Hibbert continued to ask, "Miss Dill, what sequence extraordinary are you now?" Hugh was not surprised by Hibbert's question. After all, the other party was the son of an earl and had a close relationship with Ember, so it wasn't strange for him to know she was an extraordinary. Having successfully fulfilled her wish, she was feeling incredibly relaxed at this moment, so she didn't hide anything and directly answered. Sequence 7 Feet Interrogator. The Arbitrator Pathway. Hibbert showed a thoughtful expression and suddenly asked, "Miss Dilcha, are you interested in joining Military Intelligence 9 and serving the kingdom?" Military Intelligence 9. Hugh was startled. Hibbert nodded gently. "Yes, the Hall family also has some friends in Military Intelligence 9 and can arrange a good position for you." Hugh immediately realized that this was undoubtedly a good thing for her. Because even if she could restore her father's reputation and restore her family's peerage and fiefdom, it would only be limited to that. She could neither restore her ancestors' statuses, court earl, nor serve as the commander of the Royal Guard or captain of the Royal Guards again. This meant that Hugh's only two paths in the future were to join Military Intelligence 9 or the military. The military required military achievements for rapid promotion, while Military Intelligence 9's goal was to capture threatening wild extraordinaries and members of secret organizations. If she joined the military, she would inevitably have to leave Backland, and even the North Continent, to go to the colonies on the South Continent. But for Hugh, who was dedicated to restoring her father's reputation and family status, it was clearly not a good choice. In comparison, joining Military Intelligence 9 was undoubtedly a better choice. Not only would she not have to leave Backland, but she could also gain greater convenience than her colleagues by relying on the intelligence network she had established in the East District, making it easier to earn merit. Hugh asked with some vigilance, "Is this also you, Ash's suggestion?" If it were Ember's suggestion, she definitely wouldn't refuse, even if she didn't want to join Military Intelligence 9 herself, because she believed Ember wouldn't harm her. But Ember only said he would contact the Hall family and try to help her father clear his injustice, and never mentioned Military Intelligence 9. If it were Ember's suggestion, he would definitely have told her in advance instead of having Hibbert suggest it to her. And this made Hugh have to suspect the other party's motive. Hibbert shook his head and said frankly, "No, this is my personal suggestion. Miss Dill can think about it carefully. It's not bad for you, is it?" Hugh frowned slightly. She really couldn't see any harm in this for her, but the question was, what benefit was there for the Hall family? She didn't think such a great noble family would do such a thankless job. Inserting a wild extraordinary like her into the ranks of official extraordinaries would definitely consume the Hall family's connections in Military Intelligence 9. Hibbert didn't beat around the bush at all and said frankly, "You can see this as an investment. The Hall family needs a firm ally within Military Intelligence 9. Furs, who was sitting behind the two, had been eavesdropping on their conversation, and she almost immediately caught the key point in his words, firm ally. Hugh didn't know much about the Hall family, but she knew their high status in business. And by common sense, it was difficult for a family to have a high status in multiple fields at the same time. The Hall family's status in business precisely indicated the weakness of their influence in the military and Military Intelligence 9. They could certainly win over a group of friends close to the Hall family by giving money and gifts. But the relationship between these friends and the Hall family was not stable. Having gathered due to interests, they could betray them at any time because of interests. The Hall family had always been like this before, which showed that they weren't too concerned about whether these allies were firm enough in the past. But now that George IV had just ascended the throne, the Hall family would definitely gain a lot of benefits from it. Also, in order to adapt to the new situation, the Hall family needed to re-strategize. Audrey's extensive acquisition of extraordinary materials at the Tarot Club was one manifestation of this re-strategizing, meaning the Hall family was cultivating their own extraordinaries on a large scale. On the other hand, the Hall family also needed to develop new allies. The superficial friends from the past were clearly unreliable. The Hall family needed to cultivate a group of firm allies who stood on their side, or at least had consistent interests. And people like Hugh, who were stripped of their peerage because their father suffered injustice, were undoubtedly the best investment targets. Furs understood this point, but Hugh was clearly still a bit confused. She almost subconsciously turned her head to look at her friend, and when Furs met Hugh's gaze, she immediately nodded subtly. While the Hall family certainly wanted to cultivate a group of allies, this clearly had no harm for Hugh either. Just as Hibbert said, this was an investment. And such an investment with no harsh requirements was entirely beneficial and harmless for the invested party. Hugh in the front row received the signal from Furs, believed her friend's judgment without hesitation, and agreed to Hibbert's proposal. A wise choice. Hibbert's face showed a smile. He then got up and walked towards the altar, bowed to the bishop with very short black hair, then came to the donation box next to it, took out 10 banknotes of £10 each, and put them in one by one. Seeing Hibbert turn to leave, Hugh hesitated for a moment, then also took out a large sum of £1 and put it into the donation box. Furs, sitting in the back, hesitated for a long time, then also stood up and walked to the donation box. Everyone else had put in money. Not putting any in wasn't an option, but putting it in was even worse, because she was a believer of the steam church. It was one thing to enter the Church of the Knights Church, but to actually put money into the donation box. Furs painfully took out a £1 banknote from her purse and put it into the donation box, suddenly feeling a bit guilty. She had prayed so many times in the steam church's church, and each time she only put in a few pence. Plus, she was relatively lazy herself, often not going even once a week, which resulted in the total amount she had donated to the steam church over the years not being as much as this single time. Furs couldn't help but mutter softly in her heart, "Maybe I should just convert to the goddess of the night." Walking out of the church, Furs immediately saw Hibbert and Hugh standing beside a luxurious carriage. She immediately wanted to pretend she didn't know them and leave from the side. Hibbert, with sharp eyes, noticed Furs also leaving the church and greeted her with a smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Furs." Having been spotted, Furs couldn't help but feel a bit awkward and asked, as if changing the subject. "Lord Hibbert, you know me." Hibbert said with a smile. "Of course, Audrey often mentions you to me, saying you are an excellent writer." "I see." Furs showed a look of realization, but muttered, as if, in her heart. Even if Audrey had really mentioned her, Hibbert had never met her, so how would he know who she was? He must have investigated Hugh in advance and knew about their relationship. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Furs and Hugh watched as Hibbert boarded the luxurious carriage with the Hall family crest and slowly drove away. "Furs," Hugh called out softly, but was quickly interrupted by Furs, "let's talk about it when we get back." "Okay." Hugh nodded silently. The two briefly confirmed their direction and turned into a deserted alleyway beside the road. Hugh gently held Furs's hand. In a burst of faint blue illusory light, the figures of the two disappeared in the blink of an eye. 117 Birmingham Street, Hillston District. The two who had just disappeared on Pesfield Street quietly appeared in the living room of the house. "Ah, I'm exhausted." Furs immediately threw herself onto the sofa, hugging the petite loli who was obediently sitting on the sofa, rubbing her cheek hard. "Kurala, did you miss me?" Hugh held her forehead with one hand and sighed helplessly. "Furs, act normal." Furs asked back righteously. "Am I not normal?" Hugh was a bit speechless, but didn't continue to press the issue, because she knew she definitely couldn't outtalk Furs. Although she was a slacker, Furs, as a novel writer, was much more eloquent than Hugh. "Let's talk about serious matters." Hugh's expression became serious, and she asked somewhat doubtfully, "Why did you want me to agree to Lord Hibbert's suggestion?" Furs waved her hand and said, "Relax, this is a good thing for you. As for the Hall family, you don't need to worry about them having ulterior motives. This is just one of many investments for them, and the reason they chose you is probably because of Ember. What's more, joining Military Intelligence 9 can also make you less transparent. From any perspective, it's beneficial and harmless to you." Hugh immediately realized that what Furs meant by transparent was the Tarot Club. Among all the members of the entire Tarot Club, she was the only one who had no power behind her. Therefore, she had always been a little transparent, having no needs and unable to provide any help. This wasn't a good thing. It easily made others feel that her existence in the Tarot Club was somewhat redundant. If this continued, she might even be kicked out of the Tarot Club by Mr. Fool. Joining Military Intelligence 9 could be considered a slight increase in her value. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.